Hello, everybody. This is the History Dose live stream talking all things in the latest Mongol episode. A bunch of you guys watched, as well as just Mongol history in general. I'm Chris. I'm the writer, narrator, researcher, other things, producer at History Dose. This is my brother Joe.
I'm
does all
I'm
the
Joe.
art, editing, a bunch of the music. Well, yeah, all the music now.
All the music
and
now.
then
Yeah.
today, as a guest, we have the one and only Jackmeister. Jack, I don't know if you want to say
Welcome,
a few
Jack.
words of introduction for people. It's been a while since you've been on a stream with us, so.
Well, thank you for having me again. I think this must be the third or fourth one of these we've done now. I am a historian of the Mongol Empire. I'm currently a doctoral candidate at the Central European University. My current research focuses mostly on the Golden Horde in the late 13th century, but working with both Chris and Joe and other YouTube channels like Kings and Generals in particular, and my own YouTube channel, though I haven't uploaded anything in a while. I've looked at all corners of the Mongol Empire, researched an alarming amount of it, and there's still much more to learn about it. It's real. You turn over a rock and you find something you've never even heard of before, a new source you didn't know about. It's a really rich area of study, and there's just ongoing fascinating scholarship happening every day on it. So I love to take part in projects like this where we can share even just a little bit of it.
Yeah, and if you go on Jackmeister's channel, it is tagged in the description. But yeah, jump on there. He has stuff spanning back, I think, probably 10 plus years.
Oh, don't tell me that.
They were like a lot more memey back then. Like he'd dress up, he'd have sunglasses on.
I didn't have a beard. Sorry, that was the worst part.
I feel like you were starting to grow one.
I think I had a job at the time where I had to wear like earmuffs, and when I take them off, they'd be around my neck, and my beard would get caught in it, and it was really annoying. So I tried to keep it short a lot. And then once I stopped having to work there, now it can be.
Just double down on your Mongol hobby. I mean, you could tell in those early ones, though, it's like a younger Jackmeister. It's a young warlord trying to make his name. And but you had all the passion there, like, I don't know, you would probably say that your research is a lot more intensive or nuanced than it was back then. But in those early ones, you ever look up like old Jackmeister ones, he is just sort of like, I could tell you like love the stories, and you're just like, all right, Temujin did this, and then Oalun is captured and all that, and it's like you're someone who's kind of like obsessed about these stories and this narrative and the life of Temujin and his successors for over a decade, I would think now.
Well, and this is what's interesting, because now that I spent so long with these stories, they keep coming back to them every so often. For example, with this latest video you put out, taking like a new approach or taking a new look at them, where it's like, all right, I have the version I remember in my head, but let's revisit the sources, look at some of the more recent literature, and see what kind of new angles we can tease out of it that I wouldn't have been able to do 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And you always learn more about them doing things like that. And especially with these stories. So when I would have first started, 2016 or whenever that was, I didn't have very good access to sources or to materials. So I would have been working with like Jack Weatherford's book, Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World. But now I know quite well all of our surviving sources from the empire. So those written from within the Mongol Empire, from the Khanites, usually from the late 13th century onwards. So these are sources like the Secret History of the Mongols, the Jackmeister, the Yunsha, but also sources written from outside of the empire that give certain views at it. So these include our traveler accounts of Franciscans going to the Mongol court in Mongolia in the 1240s and 50s, like John of Tina, William of Rubruck, and a host of other Arabic Persian, Chinese, Turkic sources, Armenian, Georgian. You can find surprising overlap between someone writing in, say, Eastern Europe and someone writing in northern India talking about events happening in Mongolia 60 years prior. And that's because they're both somehow learning through information networks originating amongst the Mongols themselves. Another interesting part of that, though, is that, of course, we now all know quite well the broad strokes of Chinggis Khan's rise to power and his dark ages on the steppe and the capture of Borta and the uncertain paternity of Jochi and this and that. But this information seems to have not circulated whatsoever until the 14th century. Like, it was only known to like the imperial court, members of the royal family. So when the Secret History of the Mongols was written, this was only for the imperial family to read. It seems before that, and we have a lot of sources saying things like this, people would ask, well, where's this Chinggis Khan guy coming from? And the Mongols were basically telling them, well, he was like a blacksmith, and because this is sort of the meaning of his name, Temujin, like a worker of iron. So the Temun is from Timur, iron, same in Turkic. And they had these stories of him being a blacksmith who has some sort of vision granted to him by heaven or a shaman, Tengri, and has this kind of revelation, and then leads a war against Onghan, the Togro, as he appears in the latest video. And out of the ruins of Togro's empire is where the Mongol Empire arises out of. So basically, any other detail beyond that, no one at large in Asia or Europe in the 13th century would have known anything about Chinggis Khan's rise to power. So we know it better than people did 800 years ago.
Wow.
So when you watch a history dose video, you're getting the royal treatment.
People would have died if that information had been known. How broadly it was circulating.
Well, those were the dark ages before the birth of Jackmeister.
It turns out it wasn't called The Secret History of the Mongols, ironically.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to bring up I put together like a little bit of a presentation, and we'll bring on some questions that people have submitted already. But throughout the show, feel free to drop those questions in the chat. I already have a couple of super chats, so that we give a little bit of a priority to super chats. They support the show. It took us 4 months to make that last episode, so your support is very welcome. Okay, yeah. So it'll be a general chat about the Mongols today and the latest episode. I hope all you guys watched the latest episode. It's been pretty popular. I think it's like close to 180,000 in 3-4 days.
Yeah.
And answering questions that have already been submitted through our different channels. We have a Discord for Patreon members. We have an Instagram for anybody who wants to follow us on Instagram. And ask us anything. I can answer some of them. Jack can answer all of them. And all right. Real quick, I want to mention, I put a link in the description below. We're going to Peru, September 14th to the 21st. There's still some spots available for that. Hosted by these guys. I got to update that subscriber count. I think we're higher now. I think we're like 840.
I hope we're higher.
Since 2018, it's just been us two brothers exploring history and sometimes the world. We did go to Mongolia in 2024. We went to Egypt this past year, and then we are going to Peru. I know a bunch of you guys loved our Inca Empire video, so this is kind of exploring the ruins of the Inca Empire. Here's all the stuff that is included. All these amazing ruins and cloudy mountain estates in the Andes, the old estate of the first emperor Pachacuti, which we now know as Machu Picchu. So it's going to be a fun time. We've only gotten 5-star ratings on our trips, so You'll hang out with a bunch of other history lovers. It'll be a good time. So
we torture everyone at the end until they admit to 5 stars.
So yeah, check that out. That's just a link in the description. And wanted to give a final shout out before we get to the questions to our Patreon supporters, everybody who helps us make this possible. We don't upload that much, but when we do, because we put so much work into every single one, the human-made art, research, writing. So the monthly subscription through the Patreon is a huge help. These are $50 tiers, the con tier. So we got 2 people. We have 2 cons vying for power in the History Dose Discord. And then we have about 7 leaders there. So thank you guys. That's a $20 tier.
Right now, the cons consider themselves blood brothers, but we'll see what happens.
Blood brothers never fight.
No.
The sky can only have one sun in it, though.
Right. Okay, so these are ones from the History Dose Discord, which you get access to if you're just a $1 member of the Patreon. Patreon takes most of that money, so we're getting like 50 cents, but it's just fun. It's a way to filter out trolls and stuff.
Yeah. We're active every day on it, so if you guys ever want to talk to us and see how legit we are, we can meet you there.
So Sean asks, when do we think news or rumors of Mongol conquest first reach Western Europe?
Excellent question, Sean. We know exactly when. Because we start getting notices of it in some European reports in the 1220s. Now, the information is very vague, like what they hear, but basically they start to hear about the Mongol conquest of the Khwarezmian Empire as it's happening. But the version they're hearing is something like, I don't know, probably people here don't know about the Prester John legend. But this was this popular belief in medieval Europe that there was this powerful Christian king somewhere in the East. And in the 13th century, the belief is that he's somewhere out in vaguely Central Asia. Sometimes they think he's in India. A bit later on, they think he's somewhere in Africa. But they start to hear as early as the 1220s about this non-Muslim king in the East who was conquering this powerful Muslim empire in Central Asia. So I can't remember which crusade it is, but there's a crusade going on in northern Egypt at the time, in the early 1220s, and they get some sort of early report of it. The Queen of Georgia, is it Rusudan? No, I think it's after Rusudan. I can't recall her name off the top of my head. She writes a letter to the Crusaders saying the reason she cannot send troops is because of the passage of the Mongols through her kingdom, and this was Jebe and Subatai's passage through the Caucasus in the early 1220s. And we have someone in Livonia, so today like the Baltic states, who's even in reporting a account of the Battle of the Kalka River in about, I forget the exact year now. I think it's 1227, 29 that he's writing. So we know very well by the 1220s, they're hearing about the conquests. Whether any of that information was particularly accurate or specific is another matter, or whether they actually understood that these were Mongols, like that this was a specific Mongolian empire. Probably not. But we know when they attack Hungary in 1241, that by that point, they've already been sending envoys to Europe for a couple of years. And one of our main accounts of the Mongol invasion of Hungary, I believe it's Master Roger or Thomas the Split. These are our 2 main accounts of the operations in Hungary. One of them, I think it's Master Roger. He says something along the lines of, by the time the Mongols actually come into Hungary in 1241, they had heard so many rumors of the Mongols about to invade that they thought it was a joke when it actually happened. So when the Mongols attack Europe in 1241, they're not all of a sudden coming out of the blue. They've heard rumors about them for approximately 2 decades.
Wow.
Was this Prester John myth, was it kind of treated almost as like a quasi-messianic sort of coming?
Well, so the myth starts to circulate in, I want to say, the early 12th century. And it basically becomes this concept that there's this Christian king in the East who will come and help push the Muslims out of the Holy Land. So not necessarily a messianic figure, but there is this kind of deliverance of the sacred city of Jerusalem from the Muslim that is associated with it.
So,
and I'll just say one more thing on that. What is interesting, though, after the Europeans start to learn more about the Mongols and get more accurate information, they incorporate the Prester John legend into the rise of Chinggis Khan and make Prester John be a Christian king who Chinggis Khan had conquered. And they identify him with Torul, the Ong Khan of the Karyats. And then so you'll get things like in Marco Polo's account, for example, he says Ong Khan Prester John was conquered by the Mongols, and now his grandson, Prester John, is the king of such and such a people in Mongolia. And we know there was actually a prince of the Ongut. So this is a Turkic-speaking group who are married into the Mongol royal family, who are Christians. And his Christian name was John at the time. So just you can see like people's brains working and making connections. Like you have the poster board and they're putting like the pictures on it and trying to red string. They're wrong, but they're also kind of right as they're doing it. It's really fast.
So was it like they did they take sort of this knowledge seriously, like it's almost a prophetic thing, and then they were trying to adapt their reality to it? Or was it kind of more of a propaganda thing of trying to fit themselves to the myth of Prester John?
Well, it's not clear how aware the Mongols themselves were of it. Now, we have cases of they seem to have been aware of the popular association of themselves with Gog and Magog, Yajuj ve Majuj, this is in the Arabic. So, these are these ancient biblical monsters, which in kind of popular medieval conception had been trapped on the edge of the world by Alexander the Great. And the Mongols at some point become aware of this legend. And we have cases where they start to be like, yes, we are Gog and Magog. And it seems part of it seems to be that Magog sounded a bit like Mongol. And people were going, oh, this is why these are one of the peoples mentioned in the ancients, by the ancient sources. Because a lot of medieval people had this conception that all of the geographic knowledge in the world had been recorded by your ancient or biblical or Quranic authors. So when new people showed up out of the blue, you had to fit them into this kind of hierarchy laid out by some ancient Greek geographer or the Quran or the biblical texts. So you start to see things like, here's this genealogy of all the Mongols and peoples of the world going back to Noah, and the Mongols and the Turks are descendant of this one son of Noah who had gone over here, and eventually his offspring became all the Turks and the Mongols, and this offspring became all of the Europeans, and this one became all of the Arabs, and so on and so forth.
Amazing. Okay, so I want to get to some of these super chats that came in. We got one. How did the Templars end up in Mongol army at Baghdad? I don't know that I've heard about that.
I think there were Templars. Armenians? There were Georgians and Armenians, though.
Yeah, so there were Christians in the army.
Yeah. So by that point, the Georgia, the Kingdom of Georgia, and the Armenian princes and the Armenian Kingdom of Cilicia, or Kilika, I don't know if it's a hard or a soft C, had become vassals of the Mongols and were providing troops for the assault on Baghdad and in the Ilkhanate wars against the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt. There were these Georgians and Armenians seem to have been at the front line quite a lot. I can't think of a case of Templars cooperating with the Mongols, though. We have attempts
plan from Edward, right, to coordinate on King Edward's crusade.
You have these attempts to, but I don't think at any point any of these armies actually link up.
If I remember correctly, it might have been, I don't know if it was Georgia and Armenia, or if it was one of the Crusader states that had allied themselves with the Mongols, and it had caused some strife within the church.
The
on the
county
part of the Pope.
Tripoli, I think it is. Yes, it's that's the count of it. His name's Bohemond, and he, according to some accounts, is riding alongside the king of Little Armenia, of Armenian Cilicia, and Ketbuka Noyan as they ride into Damascus once it falls to them. An argument has been made that this Crusader state allied to the Mongols, I mean vassal, they accept the Mongols' overlordship to the great anger of the Roman Church. There's argument has been made that they are the ones who first provide trebuchet technology to the Mongols during the attack on Aleppo or Damascus.
Oh wow. Okay, so we had one coming in. Can we make a dive Viet video? So how much do you know about that conflict, Jack?
I've written on this a few times. I have a decent bit of notes on it. I got assisted on. I first wrote about it for Kings and Generals quite some years ago, and it wasn't our best work. But fortunately, I had a Vietnamese friend of mine who knew the topic well and really educated me on it. So we did a second video on it, which was did a much better job of starting to approach some of the internal political intrigue in Dai Viet at the same time. But so that's when we talk about the Mongols in Dai Viet, that's like 50 years of on and off warfare. We're talking about like 3 major invasions, and of course the famous battle where this UN fleet gets caught on wooden stakes laid by the Vietnamese forces as the tide comes out. Like there's many like just absolutely tremendous details for like these little anecdotes to make it into the video. So I think it would illustrate really wonderful.
Yeah, we've gotten a lot of requests for that. I remember a couple of our past community posts, people are just mentioning it and upvoting it. So maybe that's on the horizon.
Yeah. Okay. Let's switch back to and keep those super chats coming in. All that. We love that stuff.
$2,000 super chats get priority.
We got $2 from Tristan. Thank you. No question. Just want to support the show. Thank you, Tristan.
Thank you, Tristan. It's really kind.
So we got a Discord message here. Meredith Patrol doesn't know if he'll be here, but said, I'm curious how the Mongols administered their conquered lands. Did they use local lords/leaders, or did they put Mongols in charge?
Excellent question. This is one of my absolute favorite topics when it comes to the Mongol Empire. Like, how did it actually function on the ground? So the short answer is, because I could spend the rest of the night talking about this, but the very short answer is they would tend to use local peoples if they submitted right away. Now they might pick a new ruler or prince or intervene in the succession struggle. But we do have cases where if you submit right away, like so with, to come back to the example of the Armenian Cilicia, the kings of that dynasty are left in place, and the Mongols just point in what is called either a baskak, a shana, or a darugachi, depending on the language and the source, who kind of acts as like a overseer who collects taxes and when it's necessary takes part in raising these troops or intervenes in some dynastic struggles. But other than that, they leave things in place. What we see in other places, though, is, so we look at, say, the Rus principalities. is we have this described in quite some detail. The Mongols will come in, conquer it. They'll leave the local dynasty in place, but they will appoint overseers. These Atrocities, they'll have a lot more kind of effective power. They'll be running cities themselves, and they'll have a lot of local officials in place who are not from the local ethnicity, but are transplanted from elsewhere. So what we see, and we have sources saying this, like in Rus, that they would bring in Saracens, so Muslims, Central Asians, to come in and administer certain posts. Same thing in China. And then in the Saracen lands, so the Islamic world, Central Asia, we see them bringing in people from North China, people from some of these Turkic groups or more kind of border regions to act as these governors and overseers. So this is like at your lowest level. Above that, the Mongol Empire is kind of has this two levels of administration. So you have the lands that are falling under the control of the princes of the dynasty. So these are your ulus, and these become the core of what, after the disintegration of the empire, is the Golden Horde, Tsagatai Khanate, the Ilkhanate, and so on and so forth. So these are lands held by the princes of the dynasty who have certain amount of autonomy, a certain amount of ability to raise their own taxes or set out postal lines, things like this. And there is a civilian administration that emerges from the 1230s onwards. So this is built on the model from North China of that they saw in North China. And the word in Chinese is Cheng, and this is traditionally translated into English as secretariats. And the Mongol Empire by the 1250s, this huge, huge space, is effectively categorized into 4 of these. So there's a secretariat in North China, a Turkestan secretariat. So this is like the Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Central Asia. There's a West Asia secretariat. So this is like Iran, the Caucasus, Anatolia. And in the 1250s, there's a secretariat established over the principalities and the Alans and the Western Steppe, though we're not sure exactly if this was actually in place before the Golden Horde became an independent entity. So you have these huge like provinces of the empire, which are headed by individuals from the Great Khan's Keshik, so the imperial bodyguard. And their tasks are local defense, post-conquest reconstruction, law, order, sanitation, minting of coinage, things like this. And all of these secretariats answer to what is called the central secretariat. So this is based in the imperial capital at Karakorum, so in Mongolia proper, and all the people in that are like the Khan's closest members of the Keshig, and they report directly to the Khan himself. And the job of this central secretariat is whatever order the Khan is giving or whatever demands they think are necessary, they translate these into the local languages to be sent, to have these orders sent out to the various branches, these branch secretariats. They receive the reports from these secretariats regarding census data, for example, and based off this census data, they are assessing, all right, here's how many taxes we can levy here, here, and here. Here's how many troops we can get from here. Here's the local resources we can take advantage of. And this is really coming firmly in place by the 1250s, especially under Mönke Khan, who seems to be like, all right, how do we levy all of the resources of the empire for the task of further conquest? And this is the system they fall upon, the best suit to those needs.
Kind of a follow-up from there. I was wondering, I mean, the Mongols covered so much ground. They had, a bunch of different authorities in different places across cultures. When Chris and I went to Mongolia for a trip, we kind of came during this, just in the wake of the fall of the Soviet Union, you get this rebirth of, cultural Mongolian identity again. The Chinggis Khan's name is everywhere. And of course, that came from a sort of cultural repression of Mongolian identity. Did the Mongols practice any sort of like authoritarian, we're trying to have a homogenous identity across these cultures? Or was there kind of some leeway and wiggle room? They allowed people to kind of have their own culturally distinct practices?
So we see no indication that they were trying to Mongolize the general population. We have no indication that the language or the script, well, this was used for official, say, government purposes, and officials of the state hoping to advance within the bureaucracy had to know these. They don't seem to have cared or seen a need to have tried to expand this across the conquered peoples. Now, the exception to that is the other nomadic peoples of the steppe proper. Now, here, I am of the opinion that by the mid-13th century, that they feel they have to Mongolize the Mongolian plateau itself, so the lands east of the Altai Mountains. And that part of the function of the secret history of the Mongols is to retroactively Mongolize this past as well. And we know that they are reorganizing the peoples of the Western steppes that they conquer to follow the fashions they see fit. And we know they are explicitly ordering these nomadic peoples to also shave their heads in this Mongolian style. So your head shaved, you have a forelock here, 2 braids coming behind the ears. Now, this is very typical with these sorts of peoples where you show your political loyalty by the manner you shave your head. The most famous example of this is with the Manchu queue, where the head's shaved and you just have this one braid coming down the back. Now, the Manchu in the Qing dynasty are successful and able to get all of the people in China to wear their hair in this fashion as a sign of their submission to the Qing. The Mongols, we are told, tried to do the same thing early on in the conquest of North China, but give up within a couple years. But we do know some people who want to ingratiate themselves with the Yuan dynasty are doing it voluntarily. So they don't seem to have cared about that kind of imposition on the sedentary societies in China, Iran, for example. With the nomadic peoples of the steppe, there is a degree of greater desire in this direction, I would say. But even then, so for example, we have from 14th century from Crimea, we have these set of documents called the Codex Cumanicus. So these are written by these Germans and Italians who are acting as traders and missionaries who are going to be operating within the Golden Horde. And they make this kind of dictionary and translation guidebook to help people with these kind of tasks. So they're listing, like, here's a word in Latin, Persian, and what they call Cuman. And we can see this Cuman, there's 2 or 3 clear varieties of Turkic represented there. But then for certain words, we can see they're including the Mongolian form. So for example, they're mentioning that the word for uncle is abaka. So abaka is the Mongolian word for a paternal uncle. So we can see cases like this where there's probably some level of intermarriage and spread of the Mongolian language in that way, but that within a couple generations, in practice, the use of Mongolian has not extended beyond, say, the internal use of the royal family or for diplomacy with the other Mongolian Khanites. And even still, if you look at the distribution of Mongolian words in, say, Kazakh or Kyrgyz today, it shows like uses that are probably like, all right, this is from marriage or like a brief period of dominance, but it was not like the effect of, say, Norman French upon English in after 1066. The other asterisk to that is that we have sources, say, usually from the Mongol Empire itself, such as the Jackmeister, where they are saying that everyone in the Mongol Empire is calling themselves a Mongol now, whether they are Tajik, so Persian, or Chinese, or whatever. And it seems part of this is that Mongol is essentially working more as a dynastic term rather than an ethnic one in the early or in the 13th century. So this to come back to our example of the Qing dynasty, you can have subjects of the Qing who are Manchu or Chinese or Uyghur or Mongolian. That's their ethnicity, but their political identity is Qing. They are subjects of the Qing dynasty. And this is probably initially, the word Mongol is functioning more on this sort of term lines in the early 13th century, before by the mid 13th century, at least in the eastern part of the Mongol Empire, taking on a much more clear ethnic association as well.
Okay, let's well, actually, let me get to, we got a couple super chats coming in. Somebody, thank you for the 10 Canadian dollars. It's what appropriate for Jack.
Perfect.
He's just looking for some sources on arms and armament of the Mongol Empire during the 13th and 14th century. He needs it for something. Do you have any resources that you would point this commenter to, Jack?
Yes. So
my resource is Jack.
If you look on my channel, I have a video series specifically about Mongolian heavy cavalry and armor. And I talk a lot about the sources we use for that there. So we have lots of very good textual descriptions. So that of John of Plano Carpini gives a very precise description of the lamellar and laminar armor of the Mongols and their horses. We have a lot of visual depictions, especially from the Ilkhanate. So the illustrated versions of the Jackmeister from the early 14th century, the Shahnameh, or the Great Mongol Shahnameh, also called the Demon Shahnameh, and there's a couple other ones from the Ilkhanate as well. We have, if you're looking really specifically into, say, the individual lamels, for example, we, especially from what's today the Russian Federation, Ukraine, we have these burials where kind of the fashion seems to have been to bury an individual with like a square of lamellar. So we can see like on an individual piece, how many holes are in the plate, its dimensions. We have burials with helmets, some which we can date very precisely because they're buried with coinage that the Mongols minted. We have enough finds that we can trace the typology of Mongolian helmets over the 13th and 14th centuries. So we see probably from the start of their wars against the Jin dynasty, they get these like small single piece iron helmets, which have like these decorative eyebrows in the front. And we can see these designs evolve as the Mongols go west across Asia. These helmets get taller, and over the following centuries, get like they have these like removable. I can't recall what the word here is now. Not a pommel or pin kind of thing that which you would put like your horsehair or something in. These get quite a bit taller. They get these longer brims coming out to the front to cover the eyes, but they maintain these kind of decorative eyebrows on the front.
I have this from the video, one of Joe's Mongols. You can see there.
So these designs, so like this particular type of helmet, it's also reflected in artwork quite nicely. So we have lots of resources. If you need more specific things, I'd recommend you email me and I can send you more specific examples.
Perfect. Yeah, I know. It's tricky asking Jackmeister what are your resources. Like he is the resource.
Yeah,
he created the resource.
We have, like, when we talk about Mongol Empire in the 13th, 14th, these are sources from across effectively all of Asia for over 200 years in multitudes of languages, both in terms of the medieval sources, but also the modern literature, especially the archaeology. A lot of this archaeological work has not been translated outside of the original languages, so Chinese, Russian, Hungarian. We've had a lot more finds from one of our big changes, because I'm kind of involved with this Hungarian scene now, is a lot of this Hungarian work is only just being translated. Like this Hungarian research on the archaeology of 1241 is only just being made accessible in English. I have a very large article on some of these specific finds, like the arrowheads, for example, and like what looks to have been the location of Mongolian camps over the winter of 1241, 1242. So we see also a type of mace head that's Seljuk in origin, but are only being found in Hungary in sites associated with the mid-13th century, when for some reason they were abandoned all of a sudden. And it seems to be that these are cases where the Mongols were picking up these maces in, say, Iran, Anatolia, or bringing warriors into their service who carried these items, who then traveled with the Mongol army through the steppes, took part in all the fighting against the Rus and the Kipchaks, to ultimately end up in Hungary. And for whatever reason, because the individual was killed or the weapon broke, left some of these behind in Hungary. So we have, I think it was like 14 or so of these. That's the last counts. Like these, but these are things are only known about to Hungarian scholars up until literally the last couple of years, when now there's a lot more interest in getting this information out there.
I was wondering, so about a year ago, I was reading and studying some about the Norse and their religion and their culture. And I remember the scholar I was reading, Neil Price, mentioned kind of offhand how there's been some work done that suggests steppe peoples may have influenced the religious and cultural and artistic features of the Germanic settlements that were in contact with the steppe people. I was wondering if you know anything about that. I remember he recalls seeing there were some saddle burials done that looked very steppe related.
Yeah, so this is not a topic I would say I've ever looked into, but I have heard about these connections. Now for example, with the arrival of the Huns, of course Attila the Hun, there's all this there's work trying to show, say, how the sword and like what would eventually in time become the sax, like the kind of knife associated with the Saxons, how these are weaponry that might be first coming to Europe with the arrival of the Huns. Of course, the Avars in the 8th century, 7th century, bring stirrups to Europe, and also influences of helmet designs and matters like this. I've heard about the say these artistic designs on saddles or weapons and things. I cannot say I've investigated it enough to have an opinion on the matter or assess how accurate those descriptions are. But I do know that the fellow's name, Cheta Katona, recently published a book called, it's like the Vikings of the Steppe or something like this, and it's about, say, these Norse like Viking, like 9th, 10th century, like their interactions with, say, the Khazar Khaganate and the steppe peoples after that. So still a couple centuries before the Mongols, but how you get some of this information passing into Islamic sources, and they have this stereotype of the peoples of this northwestern region, say the Rus principalities or the Rus who came from Scandinavia to, I would say, northwestern Russia, and how these peoples had very fine swords. And we see this information kind of continue to circulate in these Islamic accounts, and it appears in the secret history of the Mongols, where there's a certain passage, Stephen Pow identified this in his forthcoming book, Conquest and Withdrawal, where we have an Islamic account which says these people at the West, like, they're very angry people with very fine swords, and they'd rather die on their swords than be dishonored or something like this. And this passage appears almost verbatim in the secret history of the Mongols. So we have it appearing in this Arabic account, or is it Arabic? I think it's Arabic. And in this Mongolian account, both in the 13th century.
Wow.
So it's
there's
evidence for these contacts. I don't have the background to actually assess the actual extent of them, though.
So we're getting a couple questions about Timur here. I just want to thank Tristan again for the super chat, $4.99.
Thank you, Tristan.
We have one from him asking, would you guys see Timur as a Mongol successor state? And then we had a couple other ones. Let me see here. Someone lives in a property called Tamerlane. Did Timur the Lame consider himself a descendant of the Mongols and somewhat inheritor of their legacy? So I thought I'd ask those together. We're kind of touching on the same thing.
Yeah.
What do we think? What did Timur think? Maybe give a two-sentence summary of who Timur is for the unfamiliar.
So Emir Timur Bey, Tamerlane, as he's often called in English, coming from the Persian Timur Long, which just means Timur the Lame because of an injury he suffered. So this is a fellow who arises in the ruins of the Chagatai Khanate in the second half of the 14th century and is a tremendously successful conqueror. He dominates Central Asia, conquers Iran, the Caucasus, defeats the Ottomans at the Battle of Ankara in 1402, sacks Delhi in 1399 or 1400, sacks all the major cities of the Golden Horde, and is allegedly on his way to invade China when he dies in 1405. Now, officially, like for sources written within Timur's own lifetime, his legal position was that as guardian of the Chinggisid Khan. So Timur, because he was not a descendant of Chinggis Khan, and because this political descent from Chinggis Khan was seen at that time in Central Asia as the preeminent means of political legitimization, because Timur did not have this descent, he could not rule under his own name. So he kept, up until the very end of his life, a series of puppet khans who had no real power, and anyone adjacent to the court knew what actually was the case here. But for the common people of Timur's empire, Timur was still only acting as this kind of protector of the khans, and he's sort of making this show of restoring the Mongol Empire. These puppet khans, interesting enough, are descendants from Chinggis Khan's son Ergadai. And it seems this might have been a specific choice on his part to appeal back to, because Ergadai and his family had been these khans who still ruled over the United Empire. So by choosing a descendant of Ergadai, this might have been an intentional choice to go, look, I'm not trying to present myself as just the guardian of the Chagatai Khanate or the Ilkhanate, ruled by descendants of Chinggis Khan's sons Chagatai and Tolui, but that he had this kind of claim to the entirety of the Chinggisid heritage or imperial domains. Now, whether he's restoring it in practice is another matter, because if you actually look at what he does, he's kind of ruining a lot, like the Golden Horde. He basically delivers this near death blow to, and these puppet khans effectively disappear by the time of his death. Now, we have some indication that in the early 1400s, Timur's immediate successors are still maintaining a few, but by the time of the mid-15th century, the official Timurid histories are like, no, we can just rule in our own right. Timur is presented as the Sahib Karan, the Lord of the Fortunate Conjunction, and they're making this. He gets a genealogy, which gives him a shared ancestor with Chinggis Khan. So not descent from Chinggis Khan, but descent from one of Chinggis Khan's own ancestors. Whether that's true or not it's immaterial. But we also know they add to his tomb in Samarkand an inscription saying he also shared descent with Ali, the son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad. So they're doing a lot of retroactive work to enhance Timur's status after his death and pretend that he didn't need to be this kind of guardian of the Chinggisids. We have this lovely case where the famous scholar Ibn Khaldun comes to Timur's camp while he's sieging Damascus. And Ibn Khaldun is saying, oh, you're the Sahib Quran, you're this great and powerful Lord. And Timur's going, no, I'm just an Amir. The real Khan is, the real guy in charge is over here. And he goes to points to the Khan. And then they realize the Khan is not even in the tent because he's off drinking somewhere else. So they're kind of making this show of it. But at the same time, they're paying so little attention to him, they don't even realize he's not actually in the tent. So I would say officially, Timur is acting as if he is the restorer of the Mongol Empire. But in practice, he knows it's just it's a coat of paint on top of what he's actually doing.
Great. Yeah. He also, I think he has sort of religion mixed up in a lot of his conquests in a way that maybe the Mongols don't.
I would say with Timur, he is a phenomenal political mind. Now, everyone focuses on the conquest side, but this is a guy who is really skilled at being whatever he needs to be at a certain moment. So he spends probably the majority of his career fighting other Muslims, but then he campaigns through Georgia like 8 times, and that's enough for him to go, oh, I'm a Ghazi, I'm a fighter of Islam, right? Or when he invades Delhi, so northern India, at that time, the Sultanate of Delhi, this is an Islamic power, but he's killing Muslims and Hindus alike with kind of no regard, right? Because it's enough for him to go like, oh, Delhi is at a time of instability between the deaths of these sultans, and one of the sultans had sent me kind of a rude message once. Let's hop down there and sack Delhi, right? And sometimes he's appealing to like some Sunni interests. Sometimes he's appealing to the Shia interests. Sometimes he's playing out more of this Chinggisid side. Like he's whatever he needs to be when he wants to. And you have these great letters exchanged with Bayezid, the Ottoman Sultan, where then you have these things where you're like, I wish I remembered what he said right now. But he says something like, I am the master of Turan, I am this great elephant, and you were like an ant under my boot or something.
Sometimes, I don't know, studying it, and I've studied Timur a lot less, but it could seem like Timur has more of a propensity for sort of atrocity. At least some of the stories attached to specifically him, not so much the Mongols, but as opposed to like Chinggis Khan or Genghis Khan, as I pronounce it in the thing. And as a related question, Ashken's mom insists that Genghis Khan was actually merciful. Are her claims of most of the so-called atrocities being psyops true?
I would say
he didn't kill anyone, right?
He didn't know about the camps.
Not for the first 10 years of his life. He was clean.
I would say that this kind of image of all the atrocities are psyops. Like I've heard variations of this before. This is very kind of humorous because a lot of our most exaggerated claims about the Mongol, like how many big people they kill, are coming from sources from the Mongol Empire itself. Like our highest, so if we look at the Siege of Baghdad, for example, this famous atrocity 1258, we have a lot of varying reports on how many people were killed. Some sources will say 100,000, some say 200,000, whatever. Our highest number for the amount of people killed in Baghdad is coming from a letter written from Hulagu himself. So this is the grandson of Chinggis Khan, who sacks Baghdad in 1258. And he says in a letter to the King of France, I killed 2 million people in Baghdad. Juvayni is a Persian writer who he is saying things like at Nishapur and Merv and this and that city in, let's say, Eastern Iran, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan. He is saying, here they killed 1 million people, here they killed 2 million, here they killed 1.5 million. And then a couple days later, they came back to find another 100,000 to kill. Now, Juvayni, he's from this region. He was born after the conquest of Khwarezm, but his father lived through it. He would have known people who had gone through this. But my feeling is, if you look on who Juvayni's sources are, like Juvayni is working for the Mongols. He is in Hulagu's court while he is writing this in the 1250s. I think his information on these numbers is coming from the Mongols themselves, telling him, look how many people we killed. It's the Mongols probably being the ones exaggerating how many people are they're killing, because they want people to think if you stand against us, you are going to be eradicated. At the same time, I mentioned his archaeology that's being done in Hungary. The archaeological work is pretty much lining up exactly with what the sources are saying. Like the settlements that seem to be just completely abandoned, like the Great Hungarian Plain, the central part of Hungary, is effectively depopulated after the mid-13th century. We find these like absolutely horrific sites where it just seems like they were tossing these bodies into pits and outside of their camps. We have these houses that are burnt down with people still in the houses. We have this one, like one of the most kind of like evocative ones is there's a like a hearth, like, you know, like a kind of a fireplace inside a house where there's like a mother and her 2 children, their skeletons found within it. And the body of a man, the father or something, the husband, who is lying outside of it, who has whatever sword wounds and stuff. And the place had been burnt down with the family. Inside of it, we have these sites that were fortified churches. So the churches were normally the only buildings made out of stone in the Hungarian plain. And they'd be sometimes at a more elevated location. And they would, when they heard that the Mongols were coming, they would dig these trenches, like these ditches around it, these concentric circular ditches, like moats. And there'd be 2 or 3 of these. And the Mongols show up and fill these with the bodies of the defenders. Like we find the remnants of defenders who are like, they've been cut in half, like through here, cut in half. We have places where we find the bodies, they still have the arrowheads in them still. So
would the cutting in half be more of an execution, or would that have been some post-mortem thing?
We find them, like, my guess is this is like in the fighting, this guy was literally cut in half.
Wow.
Like I mean, we can find the body. We can't say specifically how he died. Like, okay, we know how he died. He was cut in half, but we can't say, okay, yeah, they held the guy up and sawed through him, or just one real absolute unit of a guy just hacked him to bits.
That'd be a cool painting right there.
The video demonetized pretty quick.
Yeah, I remember I caught a clip from a Joe Rogan episode where he had a guest on, and I was kind of cringing because that guest was doing it's kind of become a bit of a popular myth to say the Mongols were actually incredibly progressive for their times. And he said, like, if you didn't resist them, they were incredibly tolerant. They would allow you to have a ton of freedom, and they wouldn't enslave you and stuff. And it's like, you kind of have to look at it in context, though. I mean, it feels a bit anachronistic to see them as sort of this egalitarian, libertine society. compared to like what you're discussing as well.
I mean, even the like everyone has heard this thing about Mongolian religious tolerance, and it's true to an extent. We have lots of sources saying the Mongols will let you worship whatever you want as long as you pay your taxes. The thing, though, with understanding this is the Mongol of this official decree of like the religious tolerance. This isn't there initially. It's only really developing by the 1230s as like, all right, these specific institutions or religions, their churches and monasteries have whatever freedoms, and this is really concentrated with Christianity, Islam, Taoism, and Confucianism. These are the four main religions that actually get these treatments. And even then, the Mongol point of view is you can practice your religion however you want as long as you don't do the specific parts we don't like. So in the for the Mongols, they see one of the worst things you can do is spill the blood of a living thing on the ground outside of battle, because they believe that the soul inhabits, or one of your souls, your spirits inhabits that blood, and it will be stuck to that place where it's spilled and can bring misfortune. So when you are slaughtering sheep and things, even today in Mongolia, you do it on like a, you crush the heart and you do it on like a sheet so none of the blood is spilling onto the ground. But in Islam and Judaism, halal and kosher slaughter necessitates the draining of the blood. Blood's going to end up on the ground. And we have multiple cases across the Mongol Empire where they decide, oh, if you do that, that's punishable by death. But they're thinking, look, you can still be a Muslim. Just don't do these parts we don't like. We'll kill you if you do it. Or, of course, in Islam, you have to wash your hands and feet as part of your oblations. But the Mongols, they don't want you washing dirty things in running water, especially in the spring and the summer, because they believe this will antagonize the spirits that inhabit the waterways. They think the natural world, all the natural geography is inhabited by these spirits who, if they are antagonized, will bring misfortune on the empire, on the Khan. And they think specifically if you wash like dirty clothes in running water, that's going to cause lightning. Now in Mongolia, where it's very flat and a single guy on horseback is the tallest thing around, lightning's a big concern because it's most likely coming to you or your animals. And even today, I think the rates of livestock deaths by lightning in Mongolia are like, you just like the numbers for population and everything, it's still like 15 times higher there than like anywhere else in the world. That's not step
we can attest you can go miles and miles and miles, hours without seeing a single tree.
Yeah. So you imagine that they're going to be concerned about lightning because that's incredibly dangerous there. So they're thinking, what are you doing, you idiot? You're going to bring down lightning on us. And we know part of this tolerance, like we see this with the Rus principalities, they're issuing these jarliks, these edicts. They're saying you can have the Rus church can have its lands and its subjects free from taxation as long as they are praying for the longevity of the Khan and the dynasty. So there's a give and a take here. As long as you are praying, regardless of your religion, as long as you are praying for the success of the Mongol Empire, of the long life of the Khan, and you aren't doing these specific things they don't like that they think will bring misfortune, that would hamper that success, and you're paying your taxes. And I mean, you get the exception if you're the churches, of course, but as long as you're doing these things, yeah, it is, you can practice however you want. But of course, you tell someone, please don't practice the core parts of your religion if it's no inconvenience to you, because it's a big inconvenience.
I mean, it might be better than being conquered by another empire that will destroy all of your houses of worship or something and forcibly convert you. One thing I wanted to ask,
sorry to cut you off, but this ends up happening in the 14th century when most of these Western Khanites convert to Islam.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And they go to some effort to actually propagate Islam amongst their own subjects. And so there's a bit of a flourishing of Buddhism in Central Asia and Eastern Christianity, Nestorian, it's often called in these kind of flourish under the Mongols in Central and Western Asia up until the 14th century when they convert to Islam and basically stamp these out. And probably the larger spread of Islam into Central and Northern Asia is because of the Mongols' own conversion. Kind of ironically, the Mongols are a boon for Islam in that regard, despite their reputation for destruction.
Gonna run to the bathroom real quick. Don't stop on account of me.
So a related question here was did the Mongols who converted to Islam, Christianity, and Buddhism view themselves as abandoning Tengri?
Ooh.
So maybe say something about what Tengriism is. I've kind of talked about it in a few of my episodes, but just, I guess, quickly, what is the background religion of the Mongols at the time that they are starting their empire?
So this is the Tengri is in this Turkic and Mongolian steppe cosmology is both the literal sky and sometimes a more anthropomorphized deity. It's a bit of it's both at the same times, depending on the empire and the century, maybe leans one way towards another, one way towards the other position. We know that like this worship of Tengri, this is in place for millennia before the Mongol Empire. So this is it's well ensconced. Now, when the Mongols start to convert to these other religions, it doesn't seem that they are necessarily seeing them as always distinct. So we have cases. So, for example, the Mongols are issuing these conducts of safe passes. So the famous Mongolian imperial passport. So these are called Mongolian Gerik, but they're more common known by the Chinese name, the Paisan. From the Golden Horde, we have quite a number of these that survive. And they continue to be produced with the exact same style as they were at the height of the empire. Still written in Mongolian, still written in the Uyghur script, and still saying as the initial line, Munk Tengri and Hutchindur, by the will of eternal heaven. They are issuing this up until the end of the 14th century, when by that point, the nobility of the Golden Horde has been Muslim for approximately a century or so. Right? So even though, and by that point, you're getting Khans who are have like very Islamic names, and they're still issuing these by the will of eternal heaven. There's a degree of syncretism here that they don't see these things as mutually exclusive. We have cases of Khans who are still Muslims who are recorded speaking to shamans, because shamans, the main job of a shaman is to interpret like natural phenomena or identify an evil spirit that's bringing sickness. So shamans are only dealing with things that happen in this world, but your religion concerns what happens to your soul after you die. So the things that happen in the next world. So they don't see it as a conflict of interest. We have a very lovely one. So I just mentioned this. So we have a great document from the Ilkhanites. I forget if we know the exact date, but it seems to be early 14th century. So it has the same thing, like so you have the Monk Tengri and Hutchindur, and then the follow-up line is Yekisu Jaliyan Ikugendor. So this doesn't translate well into English, but it's something like by the guidance of the great fortune, like the great fortune of the dynasty. They take this and they change it to Muhammad Paigamber. So it's by the guidance of the Prophet Muhammad, and then before that is Monk Tengri and Hutchindur. So these aren't exactly closed circles once you move from one to the other.
I do wonder too if Islam was a little bit more receptive to that, in the sense that you already have that kind of established idea of you don't convert to Islam, you revert. And so maybe it's a more natural transition to say that the Mongols beforehand were grasping at Allah in some fragmented way when they had Tengri as an idea.
I mean, one thing we are told, like we have lots of accounts of especially Franciscans going across the Mongol Empire. who are always complaining these Muslims are very good at like ingratiating themselves with the Mongols. And they seem to have been very good at selling it and presenting it a certain way. Because of course, the barrier to entry to Islam in the Middle Ages is very low. All you have to really do is say the Shahada, say you recognize there is no God but God and Muhammad is his prophet. And you make a public show of that. That is generally good enough. And you just do, you don't eat pork. And like you do these kind of few easy things like this, and they accept that. And then it seems with, say, that Catholics were like these Franciscans were showing up and trying to preach the gospel, but they had very bad translators. But the Muslims have these very good Turkic translators, these very good Turkic intermediaries who are able to do a much better job kind of opening the door to them. And you have, so William of Ruberg, for example, I love his account. So he's a Franciscan who travels to Möngke Khan's court in the 1250s, has a horrible, horrible time. And he's just complaining every page. He says, look, I was there for months and months and months, and I was only able to convert 6 people. Like, we were just really bad at this. My translators sucked. They didn't understand what I was trying to do. They didn't really respect me. And there was much less kind of charisma. And the Mongols, one of the things they wanted to see here is that they kind of associate that if your god actually has power, this will manifest in some sort of actual power on the ground in the world, right? So this is probably why we don't see any indication of them extending these religious tolerances to, say, Judaism. We have like 1 or 2 examples of that over the entire history of the empire. Or Hinduism, there's not really any Hindus in the empire. They're kind of going, look, all the Hindus they do know of are ruled by Muslims in northern India. So from the Mongol point of view, they're kind of going, look, these Muslims, their god at least is giving them some states, even if we've conquered a lot of them. There's these Muslim Mamluk sultanates in North India and the Muslim Mamluk sultanates in Egypt. They're showing pretty good fights. These guys got that going for them, and their preachers are a lot easier to understand than these weird monks coming from Europe who got these Bibles and we're not really understanding the things they're saying. So, but it's a complex topic there.
Jack, do you know anything about the Golden Horde? Someone says, Professor, please summarize the Golden Horde.
I'll try as succinctly as possible.
Didn't you just write a draft of your thesis on the Golden Horde?
Like 390 pages of text on only the first 50 years of it too.
Distill it to 70 words.
So the Golden Horde is the portion of the Mongol Empire that rules the Western steppes. So what is today Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and they are ruled by the descendants.
And it reaches into Eastern Europe.
Yeah, and they're ruled by the descendants of Chinggis Khan's eldest son, Jochi. Now, they don't call themselves the Golden Horde. This phrase only comes about in Rus chronicles by the 16th century or so. But for most of its history, it's kind of the second most powerful part of the Mongol Empire behind the Great Khan himself. Initially, as part of these, I was mentioning earlier, the secretariats versus this princely administration. The Khan of what becomes the Golden Horde, so Jochi's son Batu, is also seeing himself as ruler of Western Asia as well, so all of Iran, the Caucasus, Anatolia, because they have this idea that Chinggis Khan has granted as the appanage of Jochi's heirs is everything to the west as far as the hooves of their horses would take them. And this is, they've clearly interpreted this very liberally and just assumed, all right, every western part of the Mongol, or everything west of the western border of the Mongol Empire at that point in time in the early 1220s belongs to us. So the Golden Horde will eventually go to war with the Ilkhanites, ruled by the descendants of Jochi's younger brother Tolui. They will go to war over the Caucasus in the early 1260s because Tolui's son Hulagu starts to claim these areas for himself. So he kicks out the Jochids, tax collectors and officials, and starts to collect these revenues himself. He's also sacked Baghdad, killed the caliph. And
this is before he became, or the Ilkhanate was not Muslim at that point, but the
40 or 50 years earlier.
Yeah.
But the Khan of the Golden Horde at that time, Berka, he was a Muslim. And he seems to have been annoyed because he's going, look, Hulagu, you're taking my revenues, and you killed the caliph, who, I'm a Muslim, but he's also like my son. Like Berka sees the caliph as specifically his subject and thinks that Hulagu has overstepped his bounds. At that point, Kublai Khan in the east is fighting a war for the succession to the Great Khanate. So he cannot intervene as an intermediary. So Berka goes to war with the Ilkhanites. In the 1260s is the Berka-Hulagu War. And then this is kind of the permanent fragmentation of the Mongol Empire as a result of this conflict. So, and the Golden Horde, and it's will continue as kind of one main entity, at least until the start of the 15th century. It gradually breaks up into individual Khanates over the course of the 15th century. But portions of it continue to exist up until, say, the 18th century, when you have the Crimean Khanate annexed by Catherine the Great, the Empress of Russia. The Crimean Khanate just saw itself as the continuation of the Golden Horde. And you have these Khanates which emerge from lesser sons of Jochi in Central Asia, and like Bukhara and Khiva, who, depending on how you want to approach it, you could consider successor states to the Golden Horde. I'm not really sold on that. They're not really basing their... I mean, some of them kind of connect themselves to, like, you have like the writing of Abul Ghazi Batur in Khiva in the 17th century, who connects his state more specifically to it, but not all of them do it. So the Golden Horde, though, remains tremendously influential over Western Asia for centuries after the initial conquest in the mid-13th century.
Okay, I wanted to hit a couple of these super chats. This one is not Mongol related, but Unity is Strength. Wants to know if you could get on the Patreon and get a video request considered, asking about the Battle of Adwa for years, not something about Ethiopia. Love the Anglo-Zulu War episode. That's his favorite. Yeah, I was actually just thinking about doing Ethiopia episode like a couple days ago, because I was thinking, yeah, they're one of those only states that kind of survives that scramble for Africa as like an independent power for a while, and it would be cool to kind of like weave in that Ethiopian history before. So that's definitely on our radar this year. So now I got a pair of questions. So I had one from the Instagram, and then I got a related question that came in a super chat. Instagram, Bonico asks, were the Huns related to the Mongols despite being centuries apart? And then we'll just ask it in the same go. Did the Mongols have any conception of earlier nomadic superpowers from the same region, like the Gokturks or Xiongnu, which are sometimes equated with the Huns? So yeah, basically a broad question we have here. Were the Mongols related to these previous like Hunnic steppe powers? And did they have any awareness of those people that came before them?
Oh, great question. So in terms of the Huns, so I'm assuming the comment is referring more specifically to the European Huns, like those of Attila. I mean, presumably from the Xiongnu empires. If so, Attila's Huns, a century or two prior, broke off of this, and presumably some amount of the descendants stayed there, and there's probably some sort of very, very thin connection there of just people inhabiting the same area for 2,000 years or however many millennia and centuries. I would say very thin connect, the same way that your average European can probably trace, they have in their DNA an ancestor who was in the Roman Empire or something. In terms of political legitimacy, no, nothing at all in that regard. Now, with this, but the conceptualization, though, of earlier nomadic empires, this is a very interesting one. Because when we look at these sources from the Mongol Empire itself, we see they are utilizing conceptions of imperial legitimacy that do date back to the Göktürk empires. So building Karakorum, so their imperial capital, close to the site of Ordubali, the Uyghur capital. We have this use of the title of Khagan, Khan of Khans. Chinggis probably doesn't seem to have used it himself, but we know by Urgadai's period they are using it. This in the secret history of the Mongols, this connection of their ancestors being a wolf. This is probably another drawing on another bit of the imperial imagery of the Göktürks. However, we know these images of what it means to be a steppe empire do survive to the Mongol period. What we cannot show, though, is that the Mongols were specifically associating it with a Göktürk empire. And in fact, from our Mongolian, our sources from the Mongol Empire, we have no indication that they had any awareness of any steppe empires prior to the Uyghur Khaganate. And this seems to be because they had lots of Uyghurs working for them in their empire, translating things for them, and are bringing some of this knowledge with them. And Karakorum is built near, like I said, the Uyghur capital, Ordubali, or the ruins of it. But even then, the Mongols know, the Orkhon Valley, this is an important site, and they're building near Ordubali, but we know they're calling it Mogubalik, so that meaning evil or bad city in Mongolian. They seem to have been kind of suspicious of the site until the Uyghurs are kind of explaining it to them. So it's I in general, by even the Seljuk period, scholarship tends to be of the opinion that no one has really remembered anything specific about the Göktürks. And what you tend to see when they're conceptualizing their pre-imperial history, they're connecting things such as with the legend of Oğuz Khan. So they're not even using, say, the Ashina clan or anything by that point. They're making up new legendary founders, or in the Seljuk case, they're drawing their legitimacy from an ancient ancestor named Seljuk. However, you will see people point to that there is a letter from Chinggis Khan which says, ever since the time of our Shan Yu, we have had whatever relations with China or something. Now, in isolation, that looks like Chinggis Khan talking about the Hunnu, the Xiongnu, because in Chinese sources, their ruler is called a Shan Yu. So if you look at that in isolation, you can go, that's Chinggis Khan saying he knows about the Shan Yu. The problem is, if you take that at face value, that Chinggis Khan knows this, then you also have to take the position that he had a classical Chinese education, because the whole rest of the letter is full of references to classical Chinese literature. So the reason that this reference to the Shan Yu exists in the letter, it's probably not because Chinggis Khan put it there, but because a Khitan official who had a classical Chinese education, Yilu Chitsai, was in Chinggis Khan's service, composed this letter to send to another guy who also had a classical Chinese education, who would understand that this is a reference to the Xiongnu and these ancient steppe peoples, because kind of the position that, say, like in European literature of the Middle Ages, the Huns and the Scythians become these kind of classical nomads. So you'll compare a nomadic people to them if you want to have an audience understand right away the type of culture of the people you're talking about. The Chinese sources do the same thing, and they'll say, because the Xiongnu for them continue to be very famous, just because of their prominence in like the really oldest classical Chinese works. And probably anyways, the Xiongnu ruler's title within his native language did not sound like Shan Yu. It's been reconstructed. So we have like Modun Shan Yu is probably based on how Chinese captured sounds at the time. His name was probably Batar something or other. So I do not believe, and in general, the scholarship does not believe, the Mongols really had any conception of really like any solid information for anything before the Uyghur Khaganate. And even it seems their knowledge of the Uyghurs was not very good and mostly coming from the Uyghurs themselves. But certain strands of imperial legitimacy, imperial imagery from these earlier empires does survive and is utilized by the Mongols themselves.
Do you think Genghis Khan, or maybe toward the end of his life or his earliest successors, had some idea that they are doing something that hasn't been done before? Like early on, are they viewing we're basically a more successful version of the Cariids? And then you start to get some idea of like we can keep going and conquering. Do they have some sense that we aren't like the Jin dynasty? We're not like the Liao dynasty. We're something different here.
Yeah. Well, so one of the interesting things that comes through is we have a conflict in the sources as to what year the Mongol Empire actually starts. So of course, if you watch the history of those videos, we say 1206 is the start of the Mongol Empire. And that's generally what people accept. Like, this is the formal declaration of the Yekhe Mongol Ulus, the Great Mongol State. But in some of our sources, they're dating it to 1203. Well, 1203 is the defeat of the Cariids. So it seems the initial concept of the empire was something more built on the ruins of the Cariids, kind of emerging out of the Cariids, and we're kind of like this continuation of it. And the reason for the emphasis on 1206 is to break with that and go, no, we are different from them, something that stands on its own. So I am not of the opinion they had an intention or necessarily a belief in world conquest from the start, but that this is rather something that is emerging once they start conquering North China, Central Asia, even before Chinggis Khan's death in 1227, and they're sort of having a need to explain this and go, well, hang on, what's going on here? What are we doing? Well, we must seem to have a special destiny assigned by heaven to conquer these things, and therefore we must be intended to conquer the world. So they do think it's a special destiny. And when I say that, to be clear, it's not a destiny for the Mongols, the ethnic group. It's a destiny for the house of Chinggis Khan. So when you read in the secret history of the Mongols about this descent from the gray wolf and the red deer, fallow deer, I forget how we translate it, when you read that, this kind of supernatural origins, this is not the origin of the Mongolian ethnicity. This is the origin of the ruling class, and specifically Chinggis Khan. And then you have this kind of a second origin story. And these are probably two separate stories originally that get kind of tied together, because we have signs of Chinggis Khan's ancestor. They kind of change depending on the source. Sometimes there's like 13 generations, sometimes there's 9, sometimes it's they're they were obviously working with multiple versions here. And they have this other version where Chinggis Khan, one of his ancestors, she's impregnated by a ray of light from heaven, and then leaves her tent in the form of a yellow dog, so a yellow wolf. Again, this wolf imagery. So it's them basically going, Chinggis Khan has a divine ancestry. He is a sort of immaculate conception, because this is the woman who gets pregnant from the ray of light. Her husband had died, and then she has more kids from this ray of light. And from one of these kids comes the line of Chinggis Khan eventually. So they are building supernatural explanations for what's happening. And you see this as well in their terminology, that they do think they are kind of different and special. So in Mongolian, like I said, we call the Mongol Empire Yeke Mongol Ulus. So they use in our Mongolian sources the word Ulus for these other steppe polities before the establishment of the Mongol Empire. So the Kariid in Ulus and the Naiman Ulus, Naiman in Ulus. Sorry, just Naiman Ulus, doesn't need a genitive marker there. But then, after the formal establishment of the Mongol Empire, every other state in Mongolia, like in the Mongolian language sources that are extant, these letters and the secret history and so on and so forth, they are all only ever called Ergen. So the Jin Ergen, or Jurchid Ergen, the Baghdad Ergen, the Hindus Ergen, and so on. And Ergen just means people. So Ulus becomes this kind of like a term for something that can only be ruled by a descendant of Chinggis Khan, and every other state from like the forest peoples of the north, like the Tuvans and the Kyrgyz, are called the Oyen Ergen, so the forest people, to the great empires of northern China, to the kingdoms in Europe, Magyar Ergen, the Hungarian people. The rest of these, regardless of size, complexity, military power, wealth, they are just people, and there is only one legitimate state in the world in their view, and that is the Mongol Empire.
Right, yeah, because to use the same term for another state might imply that they're on the same footing as you in terms of their mandate to rule that land.
And again, this kind of develops over time. So, and you looked at this a bit when you did your videos on the invasion of Khorasan, and we have all this thing about the massacre of the envoys and the merchants, and what we see in Chinggis Khan's lifetime. And in these new videos, you have the whole things with Ambakai and this and that, is that we have lots of justifications from the reign of Chinggis Khan for the campaigns he's launching. They're always very certain to go, look, it has to be these kind of grievances that the other state has done, which has compelled us to attack them. You can't kind of attack someone out of the blue. But by the time of the reign of his son Urgadai, in 1229, that's when Urgadai becomes Great Khan, then they stop kind of bothering with these excuses, and it just becomes much more conquest for the sake of conquest. So it's really by the time, that's why I say by the time of Chinggis Khan's death and the start of Urgadai's reign, you get much more of this crystallization of the concept of the Mongol Empire as the rightful state of the whole world, and also the only legitimate state. And everyone who has not submitted to us is in a state of rebellion. So because you are already in rebellion, by the fact you haven't submitted, therefore it's completely legitimate for us to just attack you.
Yeah, and I think that it's easy for people to look back through history and say, okay, well, look, they say, I forget what the woman's name was, who is kind of the legendary figure. It's like, what was it, who had the immaculate conception of like Chinggis's line or something like that? I forget what her name was.
Alamgula is his.
Oh, right. Yeah, and I think it's easy for people to say, oh, this was sort of imperial propaganda. They're kind of making these things up as they go to try to trick their people into respecting the state, or they're trying to trick their people into go fight for the Mongol Empire. but I think also it's important to remember what are the worldviews that these people are coming into this with, where people are seeing, if you're coming from a Mongolian steppe nomadic worldview and you see this almost inexplicably large power taking over large swaths of the world, you are actually looking for divine explanations for how this could happen, because so much of your world revolves around or how you conceive of causation is not just material or efficient causes. It's why would the will of heaven, why would providence guide the universe to do this in this way?
Yeah. People are trying to explain what's happening in front of them, right? And people kind of tend to default, I guess, to supernatural explanations when nothing else will suffice. But even with this case of Alangoa, we have this wonderful, one of our most important Mamluk authors is a guy named Al-Umari. So he's very knowledgeable on the Mongols, and he says a thing along the lines of, like he's heard of this story, and he writes them some in his word Al-Masalik Al-Amsar, and he writes like, yeah, so I've heard this story, but they're obviously just trying to hide the infidelity of this woman with this nonsense about the ray of light from heaven. But that story, that maintains a real popularity amongst the successor states of the Mongol Empire. So we get it in Timurid sources in the Timurid dynasty in India, what we generally call the Mughal Empire. They are still maintaining this, and they're really kind of, you can see kind of incorporating like almost the much more of the Immaculate Conception of Mary, and kind of bringing this on to really just make it full on. God has chosen, like just saying straight up, Allah has decided that Alangoa should be pregnant in order to bring forth Chinggis Khan, things like this. So people are very adaptable in their belief systems, you could say.
So I wanted to go. We had a super chat come in from Jay, and he asked a question along with it. Why are the Mongols so cruel, like grapes and massacres? Is there any ideology? I mean, the things they did to not sign humans. Before you answer, I just kind of want to give some of my headspace on this and kind of my own questions about it. Is that once you read history, it's like it's very easy to put a civilization or an army in sort of a bucket, and there's reputations that follow these people. But you look at conquests of the Punic Wars when they destroyed Carthage, and they say that they killed the Romans just killed the people, trying to exterminate them for like 3 days, and only on the final day did they spare the people. But sparing involved taking 50,000 slaves, so everybody else.
Yeah.
And the same thing in Alexander's conquest. And so one of the tough things to delineate for me is, you can even see in the Mongol excuses too. They can look at the Jin dynasty had killed their rulers before, but on top of that, the Jin dynasty is not something that they say, probably because there's less prestige in sort of looking after the people as a mass more broadly. But the Jin dynasty had been raiding the Mongolian steppes for slaves and destroying villages and things like that. And so one of the tough things to delineate is how exceptional the Mongols are in this. They are killing and enslaving people who have killed and enslaved them before and did that to their neighbors. And another thing that muddies the waters is that the Mongols are very good at psychological warfare. So if they start to gain a reputation for excessive brutality or killing, a certain amount of that is what they are saying that they're going to do to other people unless they submit. And so, one of the things I think that gets followed around the Mongols too is that they're almost operating out of pure sadism. So like they're really hoping that like Baghdad will open their gates so they can kill everybody. And even if there is that massacre eventually, there are still people that don't want to die in battle and don't want to waste resources and exhaust themselves. So they would greatly prefer if you surrendered and paid your tribute. But there's always that threat of violence and perhaps excessive violence to make people submit and to sort of grease the wheels on building the empire. So that's some of my perspectives, and I'd love to see, Jack, if you kind of have a different perspective on that. How unique were the Mongols in sort of what they did? Ancient and medieval warfare is always, you can always just list separate instances to show how, quote, brutal people were. But
just to add in, something just came to mind right when you're talking about that, because I recently have been looking at the 100 Years' War. And when I was working on this Mongol episode, it reminded me the Mongol siege, of course, was at a much bigger scale than anything that happened in the 100 Years' War, especially their siege of Chengdu. But Henry V's siege of Rouen in the early 15th century, where there's a slight cultural difference because he was seen as kind of being a bad Christian for doing this. But he essentially, I think it was July to January, it was a long siege, and he went through the winter, and he was starving the populace. And then when they went to expel something like 15,000 civilians or something like that from the city because they couldn't support them anymore, he was expected to just let them cross, and he didn't. He let them stay in between a ditch between the walls and his armies. And if they tried to cross, he would have killed them. And I think only on Christmas did he allow some priests to go and alleviate some of them. But yeah, 12,000 people just starved to death. And that was part of his psychological warfare. And pretty much saying, if you don't let us into these walls, you're killing all these Christians, not me. And I just saw that there, all is fair in war. I kind of see that some parallels with the Mongols as well.
Yeah. I mean, these are very valid points. I would say the distinction to be made with the Mongols is not, say, one of quality, but one of quantity. Nothing of the particular things they are doing are things that no one else is doing, even in the 13th century. It's the fact that they are capable and actively doing it across a broad expanse of land so quickly that is shocking medieval authors. It's the fact, when you have writers like Ibn al-Athir writing in Mosul in the 1220s, and he's hearing all these horrible things, but he's also hearing it from his point of view, the Khwarezmian Empire is the most powerful state in the Islamic world one day, and then effectively the next day, it has been destroyed and all of its major cities sacked and all of these refugees displaced, and every one of them is bringing these horrific stories with them. But in general, too, with medieval society, pre-modern society, and to some extent modern societies, too, your legal or cultural or religious restrictions on what you do to a population tend to apply to your in-group and not the out-group. So the group who is not people, legally unpeople, until they are properly brought into your domains, your empire, are not necessarily going to have any sort of protection under the law, because they are not part of your law due to the fact of being part of a different state, being part of a different religion, being part of whatever. So, city massacres have been happening as long as there have been cities, and every horrible thing the Mongols did, that either in a source says or we can find attested archaeologically, we can find the exact same thing for every other contemporary state or those preceding, those coming after. But it's just their success at doing it over such a broad expanse of geography that this is what is shocking people. Had the Mongols only sacked Baghdad and everyone else had been fine, they make a great deal out of that, but it wouldn't be as shocking to the authors in quite the same way, because then it's also like, to these Islamic authors, it's like this ultimate tragedy on top of all these other things. So I mentioned Juvayni, of course, earlier. He's a guy writing for Hulagu, and he is writing about how Hulagu's conquests compared to Chinggis Khan's a generation prior, how Hulagu is so much more kind of civilized and merciful, because Hulagu is mainly campaigning against who Juvayni sees as heretics. So the Nasari Ismailis, the assassins across the mountains in northern Iran and Kurdistan. And so Juvayni is able to go, look, Hulagu has been sent by Allah to come and wipe the state of these horrible heretics. But Juvayni's text, Tariki Jahan Gushe, stops just before the sack of Baghdad. Now, Juvayni ultimately becomes the governor of the city. But one of the questions that scholarship has been asking for generations and generations is asking, what effect did this have on Juvayni? Like to present the Mongols in such a light, and then have the kind of the capital of Islam, the Caliph, so violently destroyed and this population massacred by his bosses. And then he's appointed to oversee the city and its reconstruction afterwards. So did he stop writing because he was too busy with this task? Or did he stop writing because he did not know how to square the circle on that point? People have different positions. A colleague of mine, Jan Yonovsky, has a very good point where he says, look, I'm not Juvayni's therapist. I can't assess this. If he didn't put it on the page, I can't tell you what, but it's hard not to wonder with that kind of thing. Or even for people like Juvayni, who are the true believers in the Mongol imperial project, what do you do with that kind of whiplash of, okay, now it's someone I was kind of more sympathetic who has now fallen under their hooves?
So one of the things I was thinking about was when we did that episode on Brian Boru, and this is medieval Ireland. You could see everybody at this point, at the time of our episode, there's several centuries have gone by where Ireland is basically thoroughly Christian, but they still have lots of practices. There's still like the hills that were sacred in pagan times are still sacred, and there's spirits and things like that.
Trees,
all that sort of fun syncretism. And then what was happening is you had these Vikings coming in, and sometimes the Vikings would raid a church, but then the Vikings became Christian as well. And so you have a lot of people that are like nominally Christian or are Christian. And so a couple of the times, Brian Boru sacks a church because bishops had so much power. There was still some idea that you could do this, but it was like viewed as a great sin in their eyes. So there were certain things that, as Christian rulers, you were not supposed to do, even though, and this just happens all through history, there are certain things that Christian countries should not do by their own accord or by their own book, certain things that Muslim countries do. And you'd have to imagine, okay, well, you have all these cases of hypocrisy or maybe practical notions of war that, okay, we are going to burn down the city or something like that, and you're kind of bending the rules. One of the things I was wondering is, so some of that, because there are certain times where somebody would say not burn down a church or would spare the populace because they have this religious instinct, even if there are a lot of times where they don't do that. Do the Mongols have any of that conception coming into the conquest, that there are certain things that is out of step with the will of heaven or Tengri, these are innocent people, that this should not happen? And if they didn't, did they start to gain any of it? As I can think of one example in Islam, that you you are not allowed to enslave other Muslims. So does this have an effect on later Mongol rulers? Did they gain some sort of like inhibition on their warfare, or at least theoretical reason to restrict themselves from brutality, or did they have that coming in?
I mean, I would say one of the kind of most consistent type of anecdote where we have the Mongols go, okay, we won't attack this place, is when they have a sense that a particular place or individual is protected by heaven. So we have this case during the Hygiene campaign, during the siege of Herat, I think, in 1221. And there is a Qadi, a Islamic judge, who's kind of taking part in the defense. And the Mongols have encircled the fortress, and he falls, I don't know how, but he falls off the wall, and it's very high fortress wall. He falls down, and he survives the fall. And the Mongols go, this guy must be heavenly protected in order to survive such a thing. So he gets picked up by Tolui, kind of dusted off, and brought to Chinggis Khan's court. And he spends some time, we are told, in Chinggis's company. And one day Chinggis asks him something along the lines of, how will I be remembered after I'm gone? And the Qadi says, I'm going to paraphrase here. He says, how will they remember you if you don't leave anyone alive to keep talking about you? And we have this interesting thing in the accounts. This is coming from Juzjani, who speaks with the Qadi afterwards. And he says, at that point, Chinggis Khan gets really quiet, kind of angry, and tells him, leave before I order something more violent done to you. So you have this interesting case of where the Qadi is telling him to his face, you're just killing all these people. I don't know what you think you're doing, but no one's going to remember you. Like telling him something the Khan does not want to hear, but because they still see him as kind of heavenly protected, they're like, look, you're free to go. All right, but don't come back. We have cases of cities. There's a city in Korea. I cannot remember the name off the top of my head, but there's a city where it's doing such a good job of fighting off the Mongols. Like it's resisting all these assaults on it, that the Mongols say, all right, this city is protected by heaven. We won't assault it. And after a ceasefire is signed with the Korean court, and they want to, I forget exactly why, but the Korean court wanted to punish the guy in charge of the city for something he had done, someone he pissed off or something or other. And the Mongols apparently intervene on the individual's behalf and go, why would you want to harass such a kind of heroic figure as this? So there is, you can see where they can have a certain amount of respect for, say, an enemy or individual, where they're like, heaven has intervened on behalf of this individual. And because of that, because this person's protected by heaven, we cannot do anything to harass them.
So I wonder if there's two elements to that. The first being there's a practical consideration that I can't take this city because heaven is protecting it. But there's also maybe there was a moral consideration that I shouldn't attack this city because heaven has decided that it's protected.
Yeah, and like I was saying earlier with the washing dirty things and running water, or the spilling the blood, if you do decide to go against something that heaven has put its protection around, that will result in negative consequences for you in the state. So it's safer for you not to harass someone like this. Now, what's interesting to me, though, and something I can't say that I can find the consistent reason for, is because we have other cases where a city or a castle or something will hold out for a long time or offer this resistance, and the Mongols do not decide to say it is protected by heaven and eventually force their way inside and massacre everyone. Usually, the more you resist, the more violent the retaliation on the part of the Mongol Empire is going to be. So I don't know what it is specifically about this Korean city that it was able to so successfully. Like maybe it's maybe a smaller settlement, and they're like, well, if a settlement is kind of small as this is able to resist us, that must be a sign of heaven, as compared to a great fortress or something. So.
On a related note, we just got a question about Korea. What did the Mongols? Thank you for the super chat.
Yeah, thank you, Unity of Strength.
What did the Mongols do differently from China to conquer Korea, considering its mountainous terrain? China tried multiple times and failed. Ethiopia is similar in mountains. We never conquered invasions till modern technologies.
Well, depending on who you ask, they don't conquer Korea, because there is a certain viewpoint where it's the Koreans choose to recognize the overlordship of the Great Khan. The thing with the fighting in Korea, the first Mongol campaigns there happen in the 1220s. There's absolutely horrific, vicious fighting there up until the end of the 1250s. And then you have some military rebellions in the 1270s and other rebellions just before the invasions of Japan. And by the end of the 13th century, Korea has been absolutely desolated. That basically every single city or fortress they could sack, they did. They destroyed farmland. Korea was rife with famine because the farmland that did survive, these resources were then being sent into the invasions of Japan or in southern China or into Southeastern Asia. Part of the reason Korea is able to hold out so long is because the emperor's court flees to an island off the coast, and the Mongols aren't able to get to it, and this island becomes heavily fortified, and the Koreans are able to stymie any of these efforts to for the Mongols to build a fleet to assault it. The Mongols never have any luck with fleets, and they fight this intense guerrilla warfare. So it's a slow and horrifically violent process. Why are they successful there in the way that these other dynasties aren't when fighting? Well, some dynasties have more success in Korea than others. Usually they're able to come to political settlements rather than resort to this huge warfare, so that they don't have to do that. Even in it's a slow process. I would not say it's an easy one. And like I said, some people would say, well, because they never actually get to the emperor or the king of Korea, and he's able to have this kind of negotiation, and also Korea's it's very complex. There's like a military dictatorship at the same time. So you've kind of like these levels of the military governors and the royal courts, and sometimes the courts more willing to negotiate with the Mongols than the military side is, and there's no real easy answer as to why it goes one way or the other. The Mongols just put a lot of resources to the task, and eventually it's successful. They don't, but they're not just like, it's still not a military conquest, but I would say the Mongols do have the military up, like they've military defeated the Koreans, but it is some degree of negotiated surrender.
It's a bit like maybe some of those towns that would sort of pay off the Vikings or something, so please don't attack us again. Or is it a little bit more formal in the sense that they can they request troops from Korea?
Yeah, I mean, it's by the end of the 13th, like Korea is very much like, this is a vassal call. Like I said, the Koreans are supplying huge amount of men, resources, food stuff for the campaigns, especially Japan. Like,
right.
I think if you had to pick one place in Asia not to live in the 13th century, do not pick Korea, because between the Mongol invasions and the resources being called upon to go get lost in Hakata Bay, in 1284. Like it's you have all that, and you have famine, you have disease, you have a couple period respite before this all starts again with the Red Turban Rebellion in the middle of the 14th century.
Yeah, it's not fun fighting against the Mongols or living under the Mongols, because then you need to go fight for them in the middle of a tsunami.
And the thing is, Korea kind of initially recognizes Mongol overlordship in the 1220s before the Mongols put quite heavy tax demands onto it, and then one of the tax, like these Darugachi mentioned earlier, one of these representatives of the Mongol court who sent to Korea, he disappears while in Korea, and the Mongols get quite angry about that and have quite vicious retaliation. But the Koreans are also able to, I want to be clear here, the Koreans offered a real stupendous resistance here, and they're killing Mongolian commanders, they're inflicting heavy losses on the Mongols. They're not stopping the Mongol armies, but they are offering enough friction that the process is very painful for the Mongols as well.
Wanted to take a look at some of the art from the episode now that we're a little bit into this Q&A, and we will
we're just starting.
keep the questions coming, but these are a selection of a few art pieces. Obviously, Joe makes all of the art. He's got his Wacom tablet. Could probably hold it up right now. His stylus.
I can hold up the stylus. I don't want to.
We'll use the washing
stylus. But here's my. We had some of our Mongol art. Is it showing up? Our Mongol art featured in the GeoEpic magazine. It's a big history magazine in Germany. It's probably kind of being blurred out a bit, but the interesting thing is the cover image. They were asking, they're like, oh, can we use like, it was something like 5 or 6 pieces, and they're like, we need a cover for the magazine. Could we use this painting you did of Temujin? And I was like, yeah, sure. I mean, that's Temujin's father, Yesugai, but
it could just as well be. Not
but they're like, yeah, whatever. so they just said he's that's Temujin, but like father, like son.
Yeah, so here are a couple of the ones from the episode. If you guys can see this pretty well. This one was at the Battle of Badger Mouth. So this is in the mountains north of China, or northern China. And Genghis Khan and the Mongols have invaded the Jin dynasty. And now they're being pursued by this massive Jin force, or this force that the Jin say is massive. So the Jin, or there's rumors claiming that this is 300,000 to 500,000 people. I've seen some sources say it was 100,000 chasing them. Jack, you seem to be of the opinion it could be even much lower. There's some evidence that it could be as small as 30,000 men coming after them.
Yeah, well, this is a lovely thing of the Mongols are under the impression they've won this huge battle and become Badger's Mouth Pass becomes, we're told, one of their most like fondly remembered victories, their greatest victories. But we have sources in from China written at basically the exact same time as the battle. Our earliest extant sources from 1216 or so, and we have some over the 1220s and 30s, and they're saying, look, the Jin were spreading these rumors of the army being absolutely massive because they thought, look, we'll tell them we're sending hundreds of thousands of guys at them and we're just going to scare them off, and they lose. And I think part of the reason is the Mongols are scared initially, realize the army's not actually that big, and that's how they're able to kind of break it and overcome it. But because they spread this rumor that the army was so massive, it makes the Mongol victory seem even greater than it actually was, because everyone's going, well, they just killed 500,000 soldiers of the emperor. Like, if that army couldn't stop them, what possibility does any of the rest of us have?
Right, and this is meant to show the sort of wheeling effect. So it's sometimes referred to as the caracol maneuver. But you have the Mongols one of the ways that it's conceived that they could attack you head on is to send basically these horse archers forward where they can get, there's a very popular conception of archery and war as kind of like shooting up into the air and hoping it falls down. But the Mongols have these very powerful bows, and you just want to shoot people straight on. So what it would be in practice is the Mongols are riding towards you, getting direct shots close to your line. And then the Mongols also have this ability to fire angling backward as they're riding away. So you could have this, the Parthian shot. You could have this continuous cycle of Mongols going up, firing 3 or 4 shots at you, and then as they're wheeling away, still getting more shots into your line. And remember, the Mongols, each of them might have 3 to 6, sometimes even more by some estimates, reserve horses. So if you think they're getting tired, they're not. They already have very durable horses, and they can go jump on another one if they need to.
And part of this too is once your first rank is riding back, the second rank's already coming up in the third and the fourth, so that you're getting this kind of volley fire, this continuous arrows coming into the enemy. And mentally, you have to imagine you're the guy standing on the other side, and you're being told to just stand there while people are riding up to you on horses and shooting at you. Mentally, your brain's response is, I want to go after them or I want to leave. Because otherwise, I'm just standing here getting shot at. So the Mongols want either of those options, because as soon as you do that, you leave formation and you're easier to kill. You're either running out so you can get pulled into a feigned retreat, or if you start to run away, now they can run down into you and hit you with their swords and spears. But what they also do is, if they shoot at them enough and they realize, all right, these guys look like they're getting worn down enough, then on one of these movements, as you have these units running up and circling around, one of them, oh, this is now the heavy cavalry that just came out from behind, and now they've run right into you. And if you've already been shot at for a couple minutes and you have like the adrenaline pumping and you're seeing your buddies getting shot and dying around you, and all of a sudden now there's a bunch of heavily armored guys running right at you, it's going to be very hard, if you're not a very well-trained soldier with a very good commander, to stand there and take that. And I think, and these field battles tend to go very well for just steppe armies in general, because this is naturally, that's a very effective tactic. If you're able to employ that, where the other guys can barely even touch you and are forced to just stand there and take it or break formation, that's a tough one for, not impossible, but very tough for infantry to counter.
If you guys have ever played Bannerlord, it works. So I wanted to show some of these details. You can see sort of in the background there, some of these flags. So we have that like 4-color red, white, gray, black flag, as well as these kind of more triangular flags that are black, and they have these white circles in the middle. So those are actually taken. This is from the huge document, almost 200 pages that I've made for Joe, with a bunch of resources and references. Some of them are screenshots of Jack's drawings, but this is actually from a Song Dynasty scroll showing the Jurchen Jin Dynasty armies. So, we are trying to use as many historical references as we can to capture what the heraldry would look like, or what these specific troops would look like. And one of the reasons why these troops don't look like those ones is that a lot of the troops of China, of the Jurchen Jin Dynasty, are not Jurchen heavy elite cavalry, and they're not even of the same clan or ethnicity. These are a lot of rank and file Han infantry that have been recruited, conscripted into the army. And so they are not looking like we see here. You can see these are the Iron Pagoda, it's sometimes called, or just the cataphract of the Jin Dynasty. And they're these really cool looking heavy cavalry that are just covered in armor. So this is the other depiction that Joe makes in the video. But those are some of the really tiny details that we try to capture.
Very little places to strike a weak spot there.
But what's always interesting about and this is, you'll notice, I don't know if you can zoom in to make it clear, but their hands are unarmored. And this is because for all of these types of cavalry, like in the Mongol Empire and China and stuff, they are almost always also carrying bows. So they're heavily armored archers at the same time who would still be expected to shoot before closing with the enemy. And these lances that they're carrying, they'll have straps on them, so you can just I don't think I have anything here I can really show it with, but they'll have like a strap on it, so you can put it like over your shoulder, and there's a second strap you can put around your foot to hold the lance in place while you can use your bow. And then because all the bow and arrows all hanging from your belt, when you need to close with the enemy, you hang your bow back onto its case on your belt. You can unhook your lance and get it ready for a charge. And they tend to charge with a two-handed hold like this.
Yeah, this. So the Jurchen. Can you talk a little bit about the Jurchen origins? You know, how are they different from the Han Chinese that have been running these other empires?
Yeah. So the Jurchen are the ancestor of the Manchu, to put simply. So they speak a Tungusic language, and they come from the area that we now call Manchuria. Chinese, you call it the three provinces, the northeast. So northeastern China today. They are coming from the southern part. Now, they're not a steppe, nor are they a nomadic people. But there is some, we can say, I'm not going to say lifestyle overlap, but in kind of the aspects of warfare, there is some overlap in terms of these horse archers, but there's much more reliance on, say, hunting and fishing and agriculture amongst the Jurchen and even the Khitan than there ever is amongst the Mongols. So these are people who are more farmers, but maybe for part of the year, because they have some herds of sheep and goats with their horses and cattle and pigs, right? Steppe nomads do not raise pigs, but there's pigs amongst the Jurchen. But part of the year, they might be spending quite a lot of it on horseback, especially what you call in Chinese sources like the wild Jurchen, so your more northerly peoples. They conquer most of northern China in the early 12th century, conquering the Lao dynasty, which was ruled by a Mongolic people, the Khitan. And they were not steppe nomads either, but their lifestyle was a bit more closer to the Mongols. And again, this reliance on usually lightly armored horse archers, but still with a heavy cavalry corps, especially around the Khan and the princes in the royal dynasty. Sorry, not the Khan, among the Khitan. So the Jurchen conquer the Lao dynasty in North China in the early 12th century, and they established the Jin dynasty, Da Jin, so the Great Gold. And they go to war with the Song dynasty, conquer the northern half of the Song dynasty, north of the Huai River, force the Song south of the Huai River, but are never able to really successfully campaign south of that. And this forms by the middle of the 12th century. And so the Jin ruling this huge part of the northern half of China today, kind of this dominant power. And then the south of the Huai River is what we call the Southern Song dynasty. And it's this is the political situation that the Mongols will emerge into in the 13th century when they start to battle China. So the Jin are always wanting to continue the war with the Song, but they're getting a tribute from them. The Song kind of have this idea of, well, we can restore our former lands in the north if we invade and push out the Jin. So every once in a while, this war starts up again. And it starts up again just before the Mongol start to invade North China. And this is probably why the Jin aren't able to respond to Genghis Khan's unification of the Mongols is because they're kind of distracted with their resources fighting the Song of the south. And the Mongols are able to bring the Song onto their war against the Jin once they have something of an alliance, the Mongols and the Song, early on. And it's a lot of fun because even the Jin, who've lost so much of their territory, so much of their resources, are still able to defeat the Song dynasty forces, even at this late point. So the Song have, especially in older studies, have gotten somewhat of an unfair reputation of being militarily useless. And I wouldn't say that, but they are never very good when they are going on the offense, especially into the north. As soon as you're in the northern part of China and the North China Plain, the territory becomes much more friendly to cavalry forces, and the Song armies are never raising very good cavalry, and it goes poorly for them on almost every single occasion.
The other painting I wanted to take a look at was this, when Temujin was captured, probably around the year, or not the year, but around the age of 12, 13. He has come of age at this point, and you have members of the clan that abandoned him that are coming back and trying to capture him and sort of neutralize that threat from this family that they've abandoned. So these are the really tiny things that nobody except maybe Jack and like two other people might catch, because we don't even really zoom in on this. But so what's being used here is a lot of people, including like movie reconstructions, will show a Chinese Kang with like a massive sort of, it's almost like a plywood board or something that is just really like bulky and around your head to make it very hard to move if you're taking somebody prisoner. It's still possible that something like that was used, but one of the things that we see in the sources, so here's an example of a sort of like pro-Mongol or within the Mongol Empire, Persian, I believe.
It's from the Ilkhanates.
Right, yeah, and so you're seeing the Mongols capture these prisoners, and as you see, they're basically, the Kangs that they use are these massive branches that have a few things going on. So you take like two sections of the branch and you can have that really like butt up against your throat and your neck. But then to make it doubly hard to maneuver, here's an Uzbek one from the 16th century. You can see that the hand is also fastened in there. So you have use of one arm, and your other arm and your neck are like stuck together, making you basically, you're just useless if you want to try to fight. And so that is,
but you can still feed yourself in things too. So that's
right.
Like the idea. You can leave this guy chained up, and you can still, you don't need someone to come and put food in his mouth, but he can't.
So functionality.
Yeah. So that was one other thing. Oh yeah, we have an example of it here as well.
Clear example, yeah.
The Jin dynasty taking some Mongol slaves. So you can see you have that, the eyebrow piece too, the eyebrow visor above, and then the last piece. I wanted to look at the Genghis Khan portrait too. I was wondering if, Jack, you could kind of talk about a little bit of the colors that Genghis Khan tends to be depicted in.
Yeah. So with the Mongol Empire and a lot of societies in the region, colors have symbolism attached to them. And we have one of the most famous ways this manifests is that the directions have colors associated with them. So black with the north, blue with the east, white with the west, red with the south, and with the center, yellow or gold. So gold is, because it's associated with the center, this gets attached to the imperial center. So you'll tend to see a Khan, we have quite a number of examples of how a Khan's encampment will be referred to as a Altan Orda. So this is your Golden Horde. This is where the word comes from. Will refer to a literal camp, or literal tent with like gold foil covering the interior, or like a golden silk lampas weave. But as well, white is associated with holiness. So I'm trying to think of an example here. You have lots of names will be derived from white. So Chinggis Khan's second son, Tsagatai, is likely derived from Tsagan, white. And they divide the noble lineages are the white-boned clans versus the black-boned or the black-headed ones, and that's your commoners, like the low-status people. And we know there's something of a rude word to refer to the military aristocracy, what you would normally call the noyad. So these are the descendants of Chinggis Khan's great generals who become an entrenched elite, are officially the noyad, but we know they're sometimes also called the harachu, so the black ones, we might say, which we have accounts of them seeing this as like a rude way to refer to them because it's calling them commoners in comparison to the white-boned nobles or the golden lineage, the Altan Urak, so the golden seed, the golden lineage, which refers specifically to descent from Chinggis Khan. Now, our depictions of the Yuan emperors tend to show them so the great Khans ruling what is now China and Mongolia. So these are your famous paintings of Chinggis, Urgadai, Kublai, and their robes tend to be more on this white kind of coloration. And these depictions are like 700 years old in cases, so they might not be exactly the original color, but probably they're supposed to be representing kind of white, clean robes because the Khan is showing off by going, look, I can wear white and clean. And we have cases where we know at, like, say, the birthday of the Khan, they would all wear white, or the Tsagan Tsar in Mongolia, and they're still practicing the white moon, and everyone's wearing white in the court for these festivities. So, in my view, rather than these depictions of the Mongols wearing all these furs and things and looking like tough barbarians, probably your Mongol royalty is wearing robes like this, Delch in Mongolian, which are brightly colored with gold and silk. Like literally, it's like gold foil wrapped around silk, sometimes even with gems put into it, we're told. That'll be very bright colors or white colors. And this particular one that Joe did so well here is based on a particular find from the period from Mongolia. So it was a nobleman buried in a cave, which I can't recall the name of the cave at the moment or where it is in Mongolia, but probably late 13th century, early 14th century. And he had basically this exact robe like this, which was white with these gold.
The same designs. Yeah.
Yeah. And you can kind of, as referenced earlier, you can kind of see he's wearing a hat, but he has that haircut you mentioned earlier, where you have the patch in the front, and then you'd have the loops down at the side of your face.
I don't have a super zoomed in one of this, but it was just one of Joe's cooler pictures. This is General Hushahu, who is the Jurchen Jin general. And you can see a combination of different styles here. So there are some other ones where you can kind of see, like you have the classic Iron Pagoda Jin warrior. Then you have these ones where there's kind of almost like more like disc-like helmets. This is a bit more of a classical Chinese helmet that you could see in ancient art as well, where you have like these wings and gold elements. And Hushahu is one of, if not the most prominent Jin general at the time. And so you see like multiple elements that are coming in here. what we're trying to show too, it would be way too hard to see at this level of zoom. But with sort of those shoulder guards or kind of like pauldrons, you can also see an element of the mountain scale armor that you see on some of these sculptures of not only that period, but yeah, I mean, there are different things happening with the Jin where you have classic Jurchen Jin armor, but the Jin are also becoming increasingly Chinese and wanting to see themselves as more Sinicized. And that is sort of facilitated once Jiangdu falls, they are moving like deeper into central China as well to Kaifeng. And so, yeah, that was one of the cooler paintings that Joe made. And then I just had one more painting I wanted to look at. And then I was thinking we could try to do a lightning round of a bunch of these questions that we have built up, and then we'll wrap it up. So this was meant to show the 1206 Kurultai, where Temujin basically becomes Chinggis Khan, and it's traditionally seen as the founding of the Mongol Empire in 1206. And so you could have had, representatives of tons of these clans and peoples coming to formally recognize Genghis Khan as their ruler. And so you have this massive arrangement, kind of circular arrangement of yurts or gers. And one of the details here is you can see a lot of times nobles would travel in these things that are referred to as ger tergin. And so that they are these massive, elaborate gers that are just basically like a mobile, I was going to say mobile home. It doesn't sound so elaborate when I say that, but it is, yeah, it's a mobile dwelling that could be pulled by oxen. And yeah, so it's just another tiny detail that's just really in the back of this painting, but we try to, this is why it takes us 4 months to make a video, guys. So I wanted to, let's jump to some of these questions we have. All right, so we'll try to do a little bit more lightning round. Don't feel like you need to give a one sentence answer, but we'll try to sort of succinctly answer those questions and then move on to the next one rather than diverting the conversation too much, just because we have got a number of these fun ones built up here. Okay. This one was from over an hour ago, almost 2 hours ago. How did? Hey, that, you know what, this person's icon is actually from our Harold Hardrada video.
There you go.
Oh yeah.
So how did the Great Khan die? Was it old age? I hope it was old age. You don't want a murder going on. What are we doing?
Well, we don't know exactly. Because basically every single source gives a different answer. The only consistent things we can say is that he died in August 1227 during the final stage of the campaign against the Tangut Kingdom. And in almost every source, they specify that he ordered the timing and the details of his death to be kept secret. And then he was ferried to Mount Burhan Haldun. This is what is consistent across our closest accounts to the event. Later on, you get more variability that like he was murdered by a Tangut princess with a cleverly hidden blade on her person, or that he was buried elsewhere. There's sources that'll say like it was some sort of disease or sickness or this and that. I'm not sure we can say with any specificity. But by that point, he would have been, like if he was born in 1162, by that point, he's in his late 60s. He's fighting height of summer. He probably just caught some sort of illness from the rigors of campaign and age.
All right. We had a super chat come in before. Thank you again, Unity is Strength. Did the Mongols know about us East African Abyssinia Empire? Ming Dynasty, I know, had contact with African sea trade that opened up after the fall of the Yuan. So yeah, do the Mongols have much knowledge of East Africa? I mean, obviously they have knowledge of Egypt, but
Yes, there is some sort of contacts with the coast through the oceanic trade. There's more of a conception of what's in the Indian Ocean. We know they're sending ambassadors to basically all the islands in the Indian Ocean. Marco Polo's account reports some information on like the Horn of Africa, Madagascar, I think. None of it's particularly accurate. So I would reckon that at least the Ilkhanate, through its contacts, through the trade through the Gulf, the Persian Gulf, is aware of East Africa. Maybe they are aware at a given time that there is a particular sultan or ruler. If it's any more specific than that, like they like to collect intelligence in case of future conquests. So I'm sure they probably at some point asked the merchants, bring us more information here. But it's not, at least off the top of my head, I can't think of much of that making its way into any of the extant sources from the Ilkhanate. So yeah, I think that's as good as I can answer right now.
Okay, we have, this one was from a while ago. Did Mongols do drugs?
They really like fermented mare's milk. I'm not sure we have evidence for use of narcotics. Now, marijuana does grow in Mongolia, and presumably shamans do seem to be using natural hallucinogenics. But were the Mongols at large in the 13th century doing what we would call drugs? I'm not sure.
Are they hotboxing their yurts?
Stoned Mongol theory.
Yeah.
Okay.
Shamans probably. I don't think. But we have the thing about the Scythians. Herodotus reports about them doing.
Chris and I did drink their fermented milk out there.
Yeah, it's
an acquired taste. I think it's a bit sour,
it didn't
but
make me high. So
yeah, we had. I guess later we had it a bit early, so it would have been like 3 or 4%. But I guess later in the season, it gets up to around 8%. So
if you refine it further to
yeah,
they call it 13th century hummus, black hummus, it's more potent. But we do have a nice account from this Franciscan I mentioned a few times, William of Rubruck, has an awful time in Mongolia, except he did really like the mare's milk. So think of that way.
I think, yeah, you're also, was it him who was writing about how you're not really supposed to be refusing anything that they offer you?
No.
Okay.
We have lots of accounts too of the Mongols. They thought it was a very manly thing to drink a lot and then throw up and then keep drinking more. So they would make like ambassadors do that too.
It's just a fraternity.
Yeah, kind of.
Okay, we had a question, Michael. What was life like for subjects under Mongol rules? Under Mongol rule, were there benefits enjoyed by being in the empire? I guess we could kind of try to address it on two levels. So let's say first, I'm a submitted ruler and I'm a subject of the Mongols. And second, what is it like? I mean, can you even make a general statement about what it's like for a civilian under Mongol rule?
I mean, with this question, it's going to depend so much on when and where. So, for example, in North China at the start of the conquests, so we have parts of North China that are conquered by like 1211. So talking about lands under the Jin dynasty. And we basically are told that there is no stable government there until like the 1230s for some of these areas, where there is no regular taxation in these parts until the 1230s. So what happens is if the troops decide they need something, they just go out amongst the territories and take what they need. or you are subject to banditry unless you happen to get your regional governor happens to be one who is a little more on top of what he should be doing and setting up defense forces. But you have some areas where the reconstruction starts almost immediately, and we are told that within a comparatively short span of time, things are back to where they had been before in terms of economy, and it has been inferred from what we can see from, like, say, the increase in coinage minting. Probably economically, yeah, things are recovered decently. I mean, you have areas too, in, say, the Tarim Basin, where the initial Mongol period is better than it was afterwards, because these areas are initially just kind of surrendered to the Mongols because there's a prince the Mongols are chasing who flees through their territory, and he'd been very harsh on the local Muslims. And the Mongols say, you can practice however you want, we just want this guy. So they kind of give him up over to the Mongols, they try to at least. So the initial rule is fine, but then later in the 13th century, that area becomes subject to much more warfare between the Mongol princes, the Yuan dynasty, and Kublai Khan, and with Haidu Khan and the Chagatai Khanate. So, that's a case where it gets worse over time. And we could go on and on. Like, there's areas where things are, pretty much normal. There's other areas where it's like we were talking about Korea earlier, where probably start to finish, it's not until the 14th century is life there recovering, even beginning to recover from the ravages of the process of the conquest.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, like, for your average civilian, are there things? It's really hard to say what an average civilian would be like, but a lot of times the Mongols are guys basically like reinstituting a ruler from the populace or somebody sort of familiar with this land to begin with. So I wonder how much of a daily life or sort of like state imposition on daily life really changed from Mongol conquest to the next person.
Again, it's going to depend on the area. Like, I would say this. So you often see lots of people go, oh, look at this quote unquote free trade that emerges under the Mongols. People can go from one side of Asia to the other. But the thing is, things like this with these merchant networks, these are wholly for providing for the needs of the elite courts. It's very hard to say that any of the financial benefit from that, or the transfer of this information, or these wares, or these spices, or anything, was going to the populations at large. And in fact, we have lots of indications that they hated that the larger populations hated these things, because all of these merchants and such are traveling along the postal networks the Mongols set up. But these postal networks are provided from the taxes from the people in those areas. So if the people on these postal networks are abusing them, which we have lots of evidence for, like they say, oh, someone stole my stuff, give me a bunch of free animals here. Or if they're traveling too heavily amongst these things, amongst these postal networks, this is falling on the local people to cover these expenses. So in that regard, in that case, the transcontinental exchanges are a net negative for them. But you have other areas, like in the Rus principalities, for example. I mean, after the conquest, the Mongols they just want to collect the taxes, and all of their overseers are basically at this very top level on top of the existing government structures. So probably your average peasant in Rus never sees a Mongol. And same in, say, southern China. After the end of the conquest, the local structures are left in place, and you're not even dealing with Mongolian or Central Asian overseers. You're dealing with an overseer from a different part of China. So we have a lovely case of a guy who was claiming to be a Mongolian tax official, but he was just from a different part of China, and they interrogated the guy. Went, hey, you're not even Mongolian. What's the deal here? And so there's lots of abuses of these systems, but there's areas where it's definitely worse. And I mean, the interpretation of better is going to be weak, because what is better for life for anyone at the bottom rung of society in the 13th century?
Yeah.
Well, it's not really better. It's just shades of worse.
Yeah. One of the things I would ask, I know we said we're going to do lightning round, but this is just so interesting. But, for a while, you still have a united Mongol empire for, a number of decades. So, it's very easy to think of like the fully incorporated empire that people think of is the Roman Empire, where you could go from one end to the other and people, could conceivably be saying Hail Caesar or something like that and pledging your allegiance. And, you kind of have like a Latin speaking ruling elite and a certain amount of occupation. With the Mongols, is there a sense of loyalty in the far-flung domains of their empire? Would somebody, I guess, would somebody in Bukhara or even farther afield be able to know that they are living under the empire of Chinggis Khan? Would this be a very clear and obvious thing, or would it be like my ruler submitted to these guys that live very far east?
I mean, in case of Bukhara, that's pretty much in the center of they very much know who the Khans are, and probably your local Khan of the Chagatai descent, and at certain points even you might be aware of a great Khan further east, but not know of him. Again, so part of what happens with, I said they're ordering these churches and institutions to pray for them. And probably these churches also serving to be like, oh, they're supposed to pray for the current ruler. All right, so they're probably announcing who the current ruler is. Or we have in the Islamic lands, you're supposed to read out the ruler's name during the khutbah, so during the prayers. So this is also a way to distribute the names. The names are also appearing on coinage. We have coinage with the name of Chinggis Khan on it as early as his conquest of the Khwarezmian Empire. So there are methods by which this information is being distributed. But we also know they're not always really caring on that side. So when the empire breaks up in the 1260s, you have something of a unification again in 1304. So I would call it something like a Mongolian confederation. So where all the Khanites are once again recognizing that the great Khan in the east is the overlord, but in practice are still independent. But what they do is they start issuing, say, coinage or inscriptions written in the Pagspa script. So this is a script ordered by Kublai Khan to be constructed for all the languages in the empire in the 1270s based on Tibetan. Now, it never ends up really having any use outside of certain government services, and even the Yuan government's not really using it that much other than a few ceremonial matters. But the fact that it starts to appear on coinage from the Golden Horde or on inscriptions in the Ilkhanate, this is not material that's going to be understood by a local or by local officials or citizens, but it will be understood by envoys of other Mongol Khanites who happen to be traveling through those lands, especially the Yuan dynasty. So there are layers to it. Like, I think as long as a certain percentage of the elite knows who's who, the Mongols are happy with that. I can go to Canada today and find you people in rural Canada who couldn't tell you who the current prime minister is, let alone our king. So, yeah. And all you have to do to learn that is check the magic box in your hand.
Right. But it's not like, like in the New Testament, you could have characters talking about Caesar render unto Caesar what is Caesar's.
I mean, there'd be an idea
not a sense like that among the common people.
There'd be an idea of the great, like we have that comes clear across in the sources that they are aware of a great Khan who is somewhere in the east. But even at the height of imperial unity, the empire is so vast that it is like, you know, you're well-educated guys who are traveling these distances and getting detailed information. They're trying to write down and understand this expanse. But as soon as like you have someone like Rashid ad-Din, he's the vizier in the Ilkhanate. He's writing the Jamiat Tawarik. So this is one of our best educated guys on the entirety of the Mongol Empire itself. And he's still making mistakes, even of the genealogies, of the landscape of the farther parts of the empire. So if a guy like this has hazy spots in his knowledge, and what's the hope for someone who's just, you know, a regular farmer and he is aware of Mongols or Tatars as someone you don't want to get caught in washing a dirty thing in a river in front of.
Yeah. Okay. So I got 5 more things, comments I wanted to get to here. Maybe somebody else could sneak one more in, but we'll try to go quickly. How did the legal, economic, political status of women in the Mongol Empire compare with that of women in other contemporary Eurasian societies?
Excellent. Yes. So probably everyone, I imagine the commenters probably heard of this idea of that women in steppe nomadic societies have higher status than they do in the sedentary society, so China, Islamic world, Christian Europe. And this is true with important caveats. So one of the things we repeatedly have, especially authors from the Islamic world, say is they'll be shocked at the freedom that the women of the imperial family have to just travel in the open, to speak at court, to disagree. Like we have lots of cases of such and such a general wants to murder his envoy who pissed him off, and his wife intervenes and goes, well, the Khan will be very upset if you kill those envoys. Those are envoys, you're supposed to protect them. And we know they could have a lot of economic power as well. Like, so when their husband would die, they could inherit his lands and possessions and increase their wealth through that means. So women had, in those regards, a tremendous amount of freedom, and especially compared to, say, the Mamluk sultanates. The Mamluk women are supposed to not even be seen, basically. Like the only time they have kind of any freedom to show off some expenses is when they go on Hajj to Mecca. But then our Mamluk chronicles are full of amazement at these stories of the power and influence of these Mongolian women. But they're almost always serving as morality stories, because almost all of these women end up murdered at some point when there's a political fallout. And now people often phrase these questions in terms of, well, women, can they partake in battle and stuff? Are we getting any Mulans out of the Mongol Empire? And we do have cases of Mongolian women being, they're always said to be able to shoot and ride horses like the men. And we have cases of Mongolian women explicitly said to be taking part in battles, fighting amongst the men, or leading armies, things like this. Of course, most famous is Haidu's daughter, Hutulun. I did a video on her a while back. Very interesting woman. But again, caveat, all of these women are royal women. Like they're all descendants of Chinggis Khan. They're all part of the imperial family. So the question that I have is this true that women can take part in these things? Or is this an allowance just for princesses of the blood? Right? Where it's like, oh, you're a descendant of Chinggis Khan and, you know, his blood runs through you. And if you want to go to war, then by golly, you're allowed to go to war if you want to. But that same allowance might not be allowed to.
Right. So we don't know for sure.
I mean, but here's also the thing, because of the nature of this warfare, where you're shooting at someone from far away, and usually the guys in battle aren't the guys writing the sources. You know, maybe there's more women taking parts in
they don't want to say
archery, but
yeah,
they're just not getting observed.
Yeah.
I cannot typically say one way or the other.
Yeah, I also think it's also just important to keep in context to anybody who would say, oh, are they, progressive or egalitarian. It's like, I mean, you read the sources and it's always some poor princess being made the forced wife of whatever conquering Khan, which that would happen in most other societies at the time. So that's another thing, is you're conquering and you're taking concubines and sex slaves and lots of things like that. So in that way, it is comparable to Eurasian societies in terms of.
We have a quote from Genghis Khan in The Secret History of the Mongols, where he's talking about one of his wives, and he says something along the lines of, even though she's a woman, she's pretty smart. Which is, so this is not like, this is a relative degree of economic or political freedom to other societies, but they're not equal with men. And something that often shocks people too is that the Mongols practice what is called levirate marriage. So that's what it is. If, say I had some wives and I died, my sons, especially the eldest, could then inherit my wives, except for the one who was his own mother. And so the wives would then be passed on either to my sons or to my brothers. And you'll get cases in the sources where they'll be confused. And one source will say, this guy is, this was this guy's mother, or this was, I think, what's her name? Gerbusu. So the
That's what I was thinking about.
Yeah. And so in some sources, she's called Taiyang Han's mother. In other sources, she's his wife. And probably because, and I think it is actually said, she was one of the secondary wives of his father. And after his father died, Taiyang then just inherited.
Yeah, you could inherit the wives of your father except for your biological mother. Yeah. And on that same idea of taking wives too, when Taiyang Khan is killed during the battle against Temujin, Temujin takes his stepmother or former stepmother and then recent widow as his own wife. And he says something to her along the lines of, you used to say the Mongols smelled, almost like she had some bias against the Mongols. And then he takes her as a wife, which gives you some indication that she probably was not an enthusiastic, willing participant.
I don't suspect the rest of her life from that point was very nice.
What would happen to the biological mother in that instance? Would she be free to remarry, or did she have some political role within the clan or something?
Would presumably be married to a brother of the first husband, if that was an option. Mm-hmm. We have cases where some women have enough political power to prevent this. So the most famous example is Sorkhaktani Beki. So this is the mother of Menka, Hubalai, Hulagu, and Eric Burke. So her husband was Tolui, the fourth son of Genghis Khan. And after Tolui dies, his brother Ergadai, who's Great Khan at the time, tries to marry her. And she is able to prevent this from happening because she is a very wealthy woman. She's said to be the wealthiest woman in the empire. And so she has an amount of political, economic wealth or power to, support herself. Because part of the idea of this levirate is this prevents what happens to Temujin's family when his father dies. Is this, if these families and children are maintained in the family, they don't get orphaned on the steppe. Mm-hmm. So Sorkhaktani has enough power to prevent this, but she's also said to be a very smart woman and is able to kind of negotiate around Ergadai and go like, no, I couldn't possibly do that I'm devoted to my husband's memory and stuff. And she never remarries. So you have exceptions to every rule. But again, we're always talking about elite women in this context.
So exceptions along lines of lineage and wealth, power, etc.
So how applicable is anything that I just said to, say, the women in the commoner families? Probably not very much of it. But in that case too, are these men taking multiple wives? I mean, there's some evidence for, but again, our sources, their interests, and this is general rule of medieval accounts, they're almost always interested just in what's happening with the elite and the nobility, and don't tend to really care about the lower classes.
So we had a question: did Mongols set up proper camps and latrines? How did they manage camp hygiene? Was disease an issue for them?
Yes. So this is a big deal for the Mongols. They put a lot of energy in picking campsites, laying them out. We have officials in the Khan's bodyguard whose whole job is picking these sites, making sure they have specific layouts they're supposed to have, because you also have to guard the approach to the Khan and stuff. And they're picked for, say, in winter, you pick a location where they're less exposed to the wind. In summer, you want something at a higher location where it's going to be cooler, more pleasant. And they're quite concerned about these matters of the removal of human waste, to put in polite terms. And this is part of why you have these prohibitions about putting dirty things into running water. Now, in Mongolia, because it's quite flat, flash floods can be horrific disasters, because the water has, once it's over the banks, it's into your camp. So you don't want your camp too close to those water resources, because it can be quickly washed away. At the same time, you don't want the big population sitting of either humans or animals sitting beside your water resources and potentially fouling them. Now, we also know that nomads, like throughout history, their general rule, when there's a disease outbreak, you move, right? And we know if someone died or caught a disease or something like that they thought was quite bad, they would isolate that person in a tent, and if necessary, leave that tent in that place, and everyone else would move on, and no one would be allowed either into the tent or to touch the possessions of the dead person. Wow. And they had a lot of concerns about, look, if you died or you were struck by lightning, the stuff you owned cannot be brought into the person or into the presence of the Khan unless it's purified in some manner. And that was usually by passing it in between two fires.
Wow, that's actually very advanced.
The fires probably weren't doing anything, but there was, I wouldn't say germ theory, but there is this idea of, like, if someone has died for some reason amongst their possessions, don't touch those possessions.
Yeah.
So more of a fear of possibly invoking some spirit or haunt.
Yeah, it's because often they are expressing the idea that these diseases are caused by an angry spirit. So one of the shaman's jobs is identifying these things. So in a lot of sources, the word that they translate for shamans is a physician. And the shamans are supposed to go in there and, based on the symptoms of the individual, say, here's the type of spirit that is trying to possess you, and I will do an exorcism or give you this ointment or this and that in a means to mitigate that. And if the person recovers, then the shaman did his job. And if the person does not, well, that's because the spirit was too powerful or something. And in that case, you really should not be touching any of those items, because that spirit could still be
it's
attached to them.
It's like believing that there's a spirit attached to it that can be passed by proximity acts as like a pretty good proxy for how germs actually work.
It kind of accidentally becomes that. So.
Yeah,
I remember oh, go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to say there's probably a bit of overlap with Native Americans of the Great Plains in that regard. or as you said, apparently in Canada they don't say Great Plains. What is it, the prairie or something?
Prairie. We call it prairie.
Prairies.
Yeah. But anyway,
The prairies. So
the Great Plains. But some of the thinking is that disease was less devastating on those groups after contact with Europeans, because you had such wide open spaces and the nomadic lifestyle. A lot of those groups actually were not nomadic at the time of contact, but they became nomadic because they got a hold of these massive herds of horses that made it a lot easier to travel that way. But the Mongols probably benefited similarly. You're not living in cramped cities and neighborhoods. If a disease
those water resources clean too, that makes a big difference there.
Yep.
I was just gonna say, I remember probably a year ago or something, I just had this idea in my head, so I painted it, but it was like the setting of the Mongol invasion of the Kievan Rus, and I imagined what would it be like if some Mongol warrior encountered some haunt that was the result of a prince there that was dishonorably killed, and his blood was allowed to seep into the ground. And then in my head, I was like, Robert Eggers should make that movie. I just feel like the Mongol mythos is just so suffused with this feeling of, mysticism and curses, that I'm just like, I love that sort of elevated reality that they kind of lived in.
They see there is spirits inhabiting everything in the world around them.
Yeah.
And part of your job is to learn how to navigate that. And the proper duties of the Khan is to maintain the right running of society that prevents people from antagonizing them.
Yeah.
Okay, were there any liberties you had to take or assumptions you had to make when you made your videos on the Mongols, conflicting accounts, missing information? Yes, all the time. Especially the farther back the history goes. What's really nice is when Joe and I do like the Battle of Trafalgar, and there are history buffs who have gone through and they know like down to the minute when this ship's nose passed this one. With the Mongols, I mean, you can see even the references that we're using. So some of those flags, it's like, that is a flag that we're lucky enough that somebody from the Song dynasty said that this is what the Jin dynasty, or showed that this is what the Jin. Well, maybe they were wrong, or maybe that's a very rare kind of flag. Maybe it's an assumption that they made. Maybe that is what 1 out of every 200 Jin flags look like. And so even if you want to use all of the references, it would be like if you took 2 shirts from Old Navy, and then that was the basis for what people wore in the 21st century. It's like, you actually have to make assumptions in order to get it to look more accurate.
That said, we don't go in and we don't apply, some Roman nasal helmet to a Mongol just because it looks badass. We know what likely probably wasn't there.
And Jack has cataloged a bunch of the findings of Mongol helmets, and you can start to see evolutions in helmet design. But I would think even then, it's still an assumption to say that definitely this is what Mongols wore during this decade, because we have this archaeological finding. And definitely they didn't start wearing the nose bridge. If they ever did.
Thing with archaeology in particular, unless there happens to be something like some coinage or something that was only minted in a 6-month period, you can rarely get more specific with a burial beyond just a couple decades span. And then sometimes someone will come along and go, well, actually, based on this thing here, this should be put like a century later or earlier. I mean, so you have the visual element where we have to make these assumptions on, okay, how, like when all our visual data, our archaeological remains for Mongol Empire, this is our 13th, even 14th century information, which we're then having to throw back to the 1180s. How applicable can those visual styles, like even how our clothing styles, how in 2020 versus 1920, there's going to be continuity, right? But even facial hair or things like that, your suits, the way these things fit and drape, how they're made, that changed dramatically. Obviously, 21st century, very extreme example. But things evolve over time, and that's before even discussing even discussing the chronology. So, like with this, I shared with Chris when they were working on this. The major the chronology of the major battles of Chinggis Khan's life as they come across through our Mongol imperial sources, mainly the secret history of the Mongols, the Yuanshu, the part that's just copied from the veritable record of Chinggis Khan, and the Jamyang Tavari. So these are our most detailed accounts originating from Mongolian sources. And even though they'll often give like the same anecdotes or details and general overview, the specific years will change, the order will be dramatically different. What actually happened in one verse, like we have the Dal and Balshuts, and the lovely detail of the princes boiled in the cauldrons and everything. But the person who does the boiling differs on the account. So sometimes it's Jamukha doing it. In other stories, it's Temujin who does the boiling. In some versions, Temujin wins that battle. In others, it's Jamukha. We have Jamukha's role in the secret history of the Mongols is much bigger than it is in these other accounts. And it kind of seems like what's happened is, for whatever reason, the secret history of the Mongols has decided to make Jamukha this sort of primary antagonist to Chinggis Khan. And now the narrative is constructed to give Jamukha more weight at all of these events than the other sources give him. So then your question right away, if you want to go, okay, let's reconstruct, the first half of Chinggis Khan's life. How do you address the fact our most detailed sources are all giving slightly different or sometimes dramatically different versions of the same events? And that's before we even want to consider, okay, but what about the sources outside of the empire? Do we utterly disregard them or not? So in this, even putting the years, we can't say with absolute certainty that Chinggis Khan was born in 1162. In my point of view, based on what we can see for the ages of himself and his children and just the general chronology, he's probably born in the early 1160s. I can't say without a doubt it was 1162, but you have other sources that are saying 1155 or sometimes later.
Well, and I think another thing about assumptions, we have to make a ton of assumptions when we're telling a narrative, and especially when you're doing the art, is that you have certain artistic references, but then there are things in the narrative. So it's like, to what extent do you already trust the narrative? So for example, one of these battles between Jamukha and Temujin is the Battle of Koyatin, which goes very well for Temujin. Now, the actual account in the Mongol royal history would tell you that I believe it was like a curse, is like a sorcerer on behalf of Jamukha summons this storm, but then it whips back and backfires on Jamukha's forces, so they're in disarray, and then Temujin wins the battle. So I don't believe in sorcerers summoning storms. So what do I do with that detail? I could say that the battle didn't happen, it's all made up, but I think it did. I think there's good reason to think that something like this happened. It would be weird to fabricate the whole thing. And then okay, well, what happened? Did the sorcerer was there really a sorcerer trying to do this? Was this something that was written after the fact? And basically what we chose to do in the video was say, it seems like there was a storm. So a massive storm made it harder for Jamukha's forces to fight. And so Joe makes a very rainy, sleety painting And so, yeah, that's an assumption that you have to make in terms of we have a source that we could go off of with things that we find dubious for certain reasons, but maybe those things are wrong about the cause of this, and they're not openly lying about that, which is something you see in ancient or medieval sources all the time. It's very, we don't step back and say, Joan of Arc didn't exist, or this didn't happen because look, they said this mystical thing happened in the battle. It's like, well, there are good reasons to assume certain of these battles did actually happen. And so you have to say, well, what is being interpreted? Where's your source coming from? And, when they say Temujin has been selected by God to rule the entire world, that doesn't lead you to believe that Temujin didn't exist. Which is very
even with those weather stones. This is a trope in like centuries of sort about the steppe. Like it goes back centuries before the Mongols, even centuries after. They're called the Jada or Yat. And you have all sorts. This isn't even our only case from the Mongol Empire, where someone apparently uses it. We have another case when they're fighting against the Jin dynasty in 1232. I think it is a Battle of something mountain, and now it's a guy in the service of the Mongols who uses it to aid the Mongols. Now, of course, in other sources, it's just there's a snowstorm and a blizzard. So you can imagine they're probably using these stones all the time, and we're only getting the references to when a storm actually did happen to arise. Yeah. But they thought these things could actually do something. So, do you dismiss it out of hand or go like, all right, yeah, the guy did use the stone, and this time it did happen to have a storm. Is that enough to make the choice to add that to the script or not? Because it's also, as a throwaway line, someone's going to be listening to that and go, wait, what? Did a guy just summon a storm? What?
Yeah, which is why I didn't mention that, because then when I do that, I have to say it was claimed that this happened in this one source, and it was already a 40-minute video, and Joe has to paint everything.
But, it could have been they actually did believe there was a sorcerer who did summon a storm for them.
Yeah, I tend to try to meet the sources where they're at, in the sense that it's become very fashionable for people to look back through history and then kind of impose motives that they can understand. So the Mongols are doing this for money, or they're doing this to maintain authority or something, and lying to the people about X, Y, or Z. But I think a lot of the time, rulers do really believe in fate and providence and fortune, and they do really guard those things. And so, of course, there's a level of maybe subconscious self-interest where it's like, of course, Temujin is not going to say, you know what, I won that battle, but I really think Jamaica should be, I think God wants him. But beyond that, it's like, it's hard, but you have to try to put yourself in the mindset of people who lived back then.
And fun fact, in that painting, that storm battle painting, there was a Mongol with an axe in that painting, and the axe head was slightly too big, so we had to do a last-minute edit, according to Jack, to make it more archaeologically appropriate. I'm sure
that all the materials I had trying to find an axe.
I'm sure we would have been killed in the comments. Hey, hold on a second.
Got a couple super chats. As fam, great job, guys. Awesome art as well. It's appreciated. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. And then Spencer, I want to say Spenka. Thank you for the super chat. One of the best channels out here. I'd love to see another Hawaiian vid. Yeah, we could probably pick up where we left off with Kamehameha. But all right. Anything else you wanted to say?
The next season of was it Chief of War?
Yeah.
Yep. So some brutal episodes there.
It was pretty. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot.
It's a fun time. Jack, any? I don't know if you flagged any questions that I didn't.
Someone had asked about Subadai. I forget.
Oh, yeah. I think before somebody said it was Subadai as great as History Does hyped him up to be. I do say that he becomes the greatest Mongol general.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
He's an interesting one because I mean, everyone knows Subadai. In my opinion, it's everyone knows the same couple 6 rumors about him that are essentially nonsense, like this image of he was one eye and horribly overweight and stuff. Well, okay, all this stuff is like modern additions to his legend. There is no physical descriptions of what he looked like or anything like that. We have this image of him as like the best general of Chinggis, like the architect of the conquests of Chinggis. You see a thing where I forget, like years ago, like Googling this and finding someone asking like, why are we giving Chinggis Khan all the credit when it's Subadai did this and stuff? Well, Subadai is not really an important person in like the amongst the Mongol generals until just about the end of Chinggis Khan's life. In large part because he's kind of one of the only one of like these guys who joined relatively early on who's still alive by that point. And he isn't really like this absolute top dog position that we associate him with until the 1230s. And even then, he loses a battle in 1231, and Ergadai Khan gets so mad at him that he nearly has Subadai removed from his position until Tolui intervenes and saves him. And after that, Subadai is able to campaign again, lead in the conquest of the Jin dynasty, and then, of course, goes on the famous excursion to the west where they conquer the Rus principalities and invade Hungary in the battle, this and that. And then he retires, and he's one of, I think, probably the only Mongolian general who actually retires and then dies of old age. So he's important, right? Don't get me wrong, and clearly a very skilled general, and he campaigns across absolutely immense distances, but he's not nearly as how do we say, as a
instrumental.
Yeah, instrumental as people make him out to say. If anything, he's actually overrated in this regard. Like he's good. Do not get me wrong, but he's not the architect.
You know what? I think part of it, I think a lot of the legend, and the reason for his greatness too, like the part that's deserved, is that he's almost like the basketball player. It's like LeBron or something. Like they played 20 years. Like it's such a long career that it is wild to think that he's fighting in Hungary and he has been here. You know, he basically joined Temujin before the founding of the Mongol Empire.
He's born in the 1170s.
Yeah, so he took a chance on this guy, and that guy ended up becoming, okay, well, he's Khan of the Mongolian steppe. Okay, well, he's conquering China. Okay, he took over Persia. Okay, he's going into the Middle East. Now he's in Europe decades, like 4 decades later, fighting on behalf of this guy's heirs. And that to me is the most insane thing. It's like, it's this long journey. He's almost like
he's playing basketball.
The cast member that never got replaced. He was there from the pilot episode until like the 10th season.
Exactly. And then everyone only remembers him because all the big guys from the early seasons got killed off or something.
And, another fun fact, another Jackmeister helping us out with art. In my painting of Subadai, I have him with his shield, but he doesn't have his shield up. I have it strapped along his shoulder. I remember asking you about that. I'm like, I see depictions of like, a Mongol might have a modern depictions of a shield on his back. And then you gave me a bunch of different references, contemporary references that would show they possibly would have strapped it alongside their shoulder, not their back. I can see how that makes functional, purpose too. If you're riding your horse, you can easily just slide it down, I guess.
Well, same like I said with the lances earlier. It's all of this stuff is designed so that a guy on horseback can kind of get these stuff out of the way and grab his bow, and he's got a place. There's only so many places you can put the thing while you're on a horse, so it just hangs off of you. And
that's the thing. If you're
would be a little strap too.
Yeah, if you're depicting a Mongol with a shield on his back, and I've also seen a quiver on his back, as if he's pulling it like this. If you're riding a horse, that's going to be so hard to do. Like, let me get my shield down real quick, guys, and I got to reach back and get an arrow. But if it's right at your side,
this is
you
not
just pull the arrow out. Yeah, it's not natural enough.
Okay, so we had a super chat here.
Thank you so much,
Francis, member of the Dragon's Armory Discord. Loved the video, learned a lot, and it was fun chatting with you guys about Jin paintings and Jin wall ramparts on the Dragon's Armory Discord. Go Big Red. Yes, he's a fellow Cornell alum. And so we were on the Dragon's Armory, also helped with a number of the references, specifically like Zhongdu walls and some of the Jurchen Jin armor. And so go check him out. I tagged him in a post the other day as well. Jack Huang was really great. Finding all these niche things. It's just all these people named Jack. Yeah. Okay, I'll give. We're gonna give the last question of the day to Fish SE7CF. Oh, and he gave a super chat too. Thank you. Thank you, Fish.
Thank you.
Dang, we got one more super chat, and then I'll give the last question to Fish. All right, thank you, Pro Console. I appreciate the super chat.
Thank you.
After 1280, the Mongols lost more often Delhi victories, Byzantine defeat, Tatar raids in 1323. Is this from Mongol weakening, or did the foes get stronger?
It can be both. So, for example, with the Delhi Sultans, they are able to develop a very efficient system of fighting against the Mongols. So sort of like the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt, where you have tremendous resources in the state are built around protecting against Mongol attacks, in large part because in both the example with North India and with Mamluk-ruled Syria, there's only very few routes those armies can actually take to come into your realm. So you can build up both fortifications, response forces that are able to stymie them while the royal army comes to deal with them. Now, both of them, and this is something I argue in my heavy cavalry video series, both of them are wielding forces of so Mamluk slave soldiers who are mostly Kipchak Turkic in origin. So they're fighting as horse archers like the Mongols, but then who get this very consistent training, very good armor, all of these things. So in my view, your best way for the most effective offensive defensive forces against the Mongols are those that are able to meet them on their own terms. So if they're already good at horse archers, maybe you can't be quite as good. Maybe you can't bring as many horses, but you can bring better armored guys. And you can have a route that is designed to get them to counter the Mongols really fast while they're stuck on a couple fortresses or something. With the case of, say, the Golden Horde, so this is a big part of my current research. So the Golden Horde, all the sources are saying this has tremendous military power, but at the same time, the Golden Horde is surrounded by very antagonistic states. So the Ilkhanate, the Tsagatai Khanate, the Khanate of Haidu, the Ogadaids. And so the Golden Horde, its main strategic interest is defending these huge borders that it has. And it also really wants to claim the territories of the Caucasus. So this is where most of its resources are always put to. This is where it's most often fighting wars. So any of its military forces left on the European front are kind of an afterthought, because from their point of view, look, these Europeans, they're tough with their castles and armor, but they're never going to be able to campaign in the steppe. So we don't really need to worry about them, except when we have, say, a bit of free time, we can send an army there and something. The exception to that is in the plains around the lower Danube, today Bulgaria, Romania. Here, because the Golden Horde wants access to the Mediterranean trade and has this alliance with the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt against the Ilkhanate, the Golden Horde is putting much more consistent pressure on that region and is effectively incorporating Bulgaria into their empire. And it remains tributary almost up until the Ottoman conquest. So in that case, even this 1323, these are not defeats in the same way that, say, the Mongols are experiencing against the Mamluks in Syria. And
it's a defeat against Mongols, but it's not the Mongols really like giving a full effort in a fight and coming out with a strong loss.
It's a much more secondary, but that's also, like I said, the southeastern Europe. That's the region where they are maintaining much stronger pressure over this period.
Yeah, and
then a lot of their other defeat, like it's a different story. But if we talk about what's happening with the Yuan dynasty, where you have Japan and Indonesia and stuff, and what you have there, in large part, I would say, is you have them starting to believe they are winning, that they were able to win battles because heaven said so, not because they necessarily put in all of the prerequisite work and scouting and preparation of forces. So you have armies that are often quite large, given lots of supplies, but not necessarily appropriate for the terrain or enemy that they would be facing, for example. And this happens in Vietnam, Myanmar, where they're sending these armies in here. But these types of armies are not always very good for fighting in very dense jungle, and they know this. They're often sending some of these forces who live in their domains, who have different kind of environments. So from southwestern China, Yunnan, but these aren't troops who aren't going to be as reliable or capable of the same things in combat as their own cavalry forces are. And this means you aren't preparing the strategic or tactical or operational aims around the capabilities of the army you have, but you're imagining it doing the things your regular troops can.
Okay. Thank you so much. This is our Mongolian buddy. He helped with some of the references, especially in that Cruel Tai painting. You guys rule, heroes of our generation, future generations of historians. Thank you so much. And I said I'd give the last word to Fish. So Fish has put in a couple super chats here. Thank you. Who is your favorite Mongol horse? And then as a related thing, he's got a number of questions about horses here, which I'm actually curious about, because I know Mongolian people today, they don't name their horses, which when we went there, I was a little bit surprised, because I would think that they're so close to this animal as part of their history. But horses in Mongolia, at least today, are thought of as part wild, part domesticated. So they are allowed to graze freely, but they aren't thought of as pets in the way that you might assume, where you attach this very strong personal bond and naming connection to them.
They do even eat them over in Mongolia too. So
yeah, they can eat them sometimes too. So Jack, I don't know if you could talk a little bit about what Mongols were like to their horses in that period, and also the last official question of this stream is: was it free for all sex among the Khan's horses?
Saucy. Well, what you observed in modern Mongolia, very much the same in the 13th century. When we have a name for a horse given in, say, the secret history of the Mongols, it'll be like it's a description of the horse's color or the markings or something like that. So translators have to make the choice of, do I translate And then Chinggis Khan asked for his horse with the white muzzle and the tawny mane or something like that, or you give the Mongolian form, which ends up looking like a name to a modern reader. But they have so many horses, you can't name them all. So all the horses, it's all like, okay, the red horse or the black horse or the horse with such and such other physical marker. In terms of the famous, I don't know who the most famous one would be. We have Chinggis Khan had a horse that was, the story goes something like, this was a horse that would, when you got on it and told him to go for a gallop, he would just take off like a rocket. And one of the guys who he went to put on it, or who wanted to like take a turn riding the Khan's horse, got on it, and the horse like ran off so fast it scared the guy or something like this. So, you know, I can't think of other cases though where they're like, this is a very famous. Or Chinggis Khan has a horse in the secret history of the Mongols where he's hunting on it and it gets scared by a wild boar, I think, and it gets scared and he falls off. And that horse is always stuck out in my mind because they take the time to describe the horse's color. It's Josutuboru. I think it's something about it being kind of a reddish color. So that's a notable horse. But when each guy is showing up with multiple horses, the horse is just a horse. Right?
Yeah, and only because it's a related question. The final super chat here, Unity is Strength. Thank you so much for all the support today. $5 support.
Yeah, thank you, Unity.
Mongol horses look like ponies. Yeah, they are ponies. Versus Abyssinian horses. Would Mongols use different horse breeds based on the climate, region, or terrain they were in?
Well, so even with Mongolian horse breeds today, there are differences in sort of some of their size and features that you might use for different on different regions. But we do know that for warfare, even other people were preferring steppe horses because they are raised in such a way that makes them really reliable in battle and for bearing armor. Now, this is explicitly said in a number of accounts. Now, people go, okay, they're small horses, they can't take a lot of armor very long. That's true, but remember, they have so many horses. What you do is you're on your horse and you and your horse both have armor on. Then that horse gets taken out of rotation for a week. You ride the other horses. And then after that horse has had a chance to rest for a week, then that horse can get armor and everything back on. So they're very good and reliable in battle. Now, we do get cases from, say, Ilkhanid sources where they're saying how they really like what we call Arabic horses, or Arabic stock horses. So this is a taller, thinner breed, much more suitable to running in these really hot climates. This is where our warm bloods and thoroughbreds are that we have today are made from the intermixing of these Arabic stock horses from these European breeds. We know the Mongols saw these as prized animals, but for princes, for riding around to show off they're very beautiful horses, so you want to ride around on them and show them off. We do not have indication, though, at least in the 13th or 14th century, of them using them specifically for war. So as far as I am personally aware, they are preferring the steppe style of horses for war or transportation, unless you really want to be the prince at the head of an army, showing off that you're on a more slender and
bigger horse.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense too, just because Mongolia itself, I mean, you have the steppe, you have the absolutely frigid winter, and then you also have the Gobi Desert. So these horses are pretty acclimated to a wide.
They're also not like the horses in the steppe are almost living entirely off of grass.
Yeah,
even in winter, like they're digging through the snow to get that grass. So steppe horses can do this, but larger breeds of horses cannot meet all of their nutritional needs through doing this. They need grain supplements and things like this, and this is not being produced in the steppe at scale. Regardless of winter conditions, you are not producing grains or hay at scale to provide for a large body of these larger breeds of horse.
All right. Well,
right, that was
we did 3 hours and 34 minutes.
Our previous record for our live stream was with you, and it was 2 hours and 21 minutes. So, yeah, you went above and beyond for this one. We're gonna have to go a max of 4 hours, or
we could go 3 more hours.
Yeah, the 24-hour long Mongols.
Yeah, we probably could.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who tuned in.
All right, thank you guys.
Supported with super chats. I love seeing all this interest in Mongol history, especially when it gets this really niche too.
Yeah,
all these really niche questions people really do like to ask. And Jack, you did an amazing answering. Mongol breeding, Mongol horse breeding patterns, and hygiene, and all that stuff. So.
That's great. Really, they were great questions. Thank you all for the question. Thank you guys for having me again, and great work on the video. People are really enjoying it from what I could tell. So I'm pleased to see your hard work, Ping. I know how much time you spent on.
Yep, and we're not done with the Mongols yet. So Jack will still be used as our source in the future for many a Mongol.
Video you've promised to now.
Maybe one on Timur.
Timur for sure, yeah.
He's quite the character.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
All right. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye.